would like to welcome everybody out to the Wildlife Board meeting for August 26th. My name is Kevin Albrecht, and I am the new chairman for the Wildlife Board. We've got an exciting time, and I will have us do some introductions. First off, I'd like to welcome our new director, Jay Shirley.
Thank you.
Very excited where we're at with the division right now and all the exciting things we have, and definitely look forward to working with you. We'll start with introductions from the Wildlife Board, and we have a couple new board members, and I would ask them to give a little introduction of themselves also. We'll start here on the left.
My name is Bryce Thurgood from Perry, Utah. I'm excited to be here. Served on the Northern RAC for 8 years, chairman for a couple of years. I think it's been 2 years since I've been off the Northern RAC, but excited to work with the Wildlife Board, with the RACs, with the division. I don't know, working with the division guys for the last 10 years, I've grown to really be fond of quite a few of them, consider a lot of them friends now. Anyway, excited to work with all the stakeholders, and hopefully we can keep it going in the right direction.
Thank you.
Carl Hurst represent the Central Region. I've been around long enough. I won't introduce, but thank you.
Brett Selman from the Northern Region.
Randy Dirth from the Northeast Region.
Wade Heaton from the Southern Region.
Gary Nielsen from Central Region. I'm one of the new guys. I've been thinking about wildlife a good portion of my life. Been in the outdoors since I could walk. Kept track of things, worked a lot with the division on different projects and different assignments, and I appreciate the opportunity to step up and speak out for wildlife and the people who like wildlife.
Thank you. We'll do an introduction of our RAC chairs. Braden, let's start with you.
Braden Richmond from Southern Utah.
Kent Johnson, Southeast Region.
Okay. Our Central Region will be joining virtual. Are you there, Brock?
I'm here, Brock McMillan, Central Region. Sorry I'm not there. I was stuck in the Brooks Range on a caribou hunt till late last night.
We feel really bad for you.
Good morning. I'm Brett Prevedel from the Northeast Region.
Justin Oliver from the Northern Region.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask for approval on the agenda.
I'll make a motion we approve the agenda.
I'll second that.
All right, we've got a approval and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good. Unanimous. Approval of the minutes.
I'll make a motion we approve the minutes from our previous meeting.
I'll second it.
Is that for the June 3rd? Those are minutes from June 3rd meeting, was it not?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Any questions on the motion? Okay. We'll call for a motion. I probably was a little quick on the last one. We'll start with Bryce. Yay or nay?
Yeah.
Yay.
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 Yeah.
Okay. Motion passes unanimous. I'd like to turn the time over to our vice chairman for our action log.
We don't have much on the action log right now, but I guess I just got a question. I know my mind went blank. Ashley is Ashley here? Yes. Ashley, just a quick question. A couple meetings ago, I don't think it was a June one. It was the one just before that. The you were filling in for Director Reynolds. That's why I pinned you. The board asked about a survey for the camera survey. Did we get that out, or did we decide something different? I know we got some proposals in our next packet, which I failed to look at just because I didn't want to mess this meeting up, get too confused. So where are we out on that? Did it happen?
So we did the technology survey that included the trail cam information in it, and part of our recommendations for the trail cam or changes in the big game rule will include that data as well. I know we showed you some of that data. Wyatt Buback's actually going to do an informational on that as well, and he'll show that at the upcoming rack and board cycle.
So a follow-up question to that. So the board felt it important to go beyond that technology survey. I'm just wondering if that's been completed.
So we haven't done a standalone trail cam survey, and that's something we certainly can discuss if that's something that the board still wants to do based upon our discussions following our work session and the guidance that we got. I think we felt like we had the data and the information that we needed to make a good recommendation, and that's what you're going to see in this upcoming cycle.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. I think that's all. It's only I have the action log. This other stuff is later.
Chairman, could I take just a minute? I'd like to add something to our future action log. As I'm sure everybody knows, as residents, we're forced to pick a once in a lifetime and an elk, antelope, or buck on our application process, where non-residents can apply for all of them. That's probably not a big issue unless the non-resident then moves to Utah, and then they come in and have a lot of points in all of those species. And I faced this weekend where I talked to a gentleman who had just drawn a great deer tag, said he took 18 years to draw. He had 15 as a non-resident. Well, then next year he has 15. Theoretically, he would have 15 for elk, whereas a resident, he would go to 0. And so what I'd like to do is make a motion to have the division look at balancing, evening out that playing field so that it would back down to where non-residents would need to pick a species just like residents, so that the table was even, and have them do a little bit of research over the next little bit. Maybe I don't see Lindy. Maybe Lindy could tell. Oh, there she is. Maybe she could give us a timetable of when she could have that ready for us. So I would make the motion that we add to the action log an investigation on the non-resident versus resident playing field and try to level that out.
Hi, I'm Lindy Varney, the licensing coordinator. So the time frame is I could start researching, and now I do know a little bit of history on this. It started back in May of 2008, and it went in place for 2009 is when this change went into place, where non-residents can apply for all species in the big game application. If this action item is approved to go through, we can start researching it, getting the information, and bring it to you this November, December rack and board meeting.
Do we need a second to put that on the action log? Do we need to vote on that? I would second it if so.
Okay, so we've got a motion and a second. Is the motion clear, Stacy? Okay, any discussion on the motion? Okay, Bryce?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yay.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, motion's unanimous, motion passes. I would just add a little bit, Director, to our old action log, in that I think one of the reasons why the Wildlife Board felt that it was important that we do another standalone survey on trail cameras was because there was so much discussion when it was in the legislature that as we move forward, whatever that vote is, if there was some very clear direction in a survey, we could always fall back on that. It seems like when we haven't had that, it continues to pop up in future meetings. And this may be a direction that we could really show that, that there was a little bit of work done in that technology survey, but I think it was more focused on technology. And so that's why the Wildlife Board has asked for that is to help us get closure. So with that, I'd like to turn the time over to our director. And so thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce myself and give a DWR update. Grateful to be here today. Grateful to be in this position. We have a lot of big challenge ahead of us, and we have a lot of things that we're doing very well. And we're going to make sure as an agency that we are open and respectful and transparent. Excited for the future. We have great support out there. It's been an interesting ride the last week for sure with all the changes, and wanted to welcome and thank you and give a thanks to our new board members and the board in general. They do a great service for us. We also have our RACs out there, a lot of new RAC members that we appreciate their efforts in making wildlife better in the state of Utah. With that, one thing I want to mention is our interim director, Rory Reynolds, who's retiring. Just thank him for his service with the agency. He's done a great job stepping up after Mike Fowkes retired. So I'm looking forward again, like I said, to great things. And we have always been a good listening agency, and that we plan to carry on that and do everything we can to make sure people feel respected and welcome as part of this public process. So with that, I will give some other DWR updates. Our aquatic section, kokanee salmon are running across the state, and it's a great viewing opportunity as they're up ready to spawn. So get out and do that. The fall season is also our aquatic section's best time to complete chemical treatments. We have treatments scheduled in the northern and northeast regions this week and next week in order to restore Colorado River cutthroat trout to their native range. Our habitat section obviously is dealing with a lot of drought concerns, and our wildlife are dealing with that out on the landscape. We've been fortunate that we haven't had a lot of big catastrophic fires this summer. The rains this last month have helped us some. We're currently reviewing and getting accurate information on shooting closures on our WMAs that we may be coming out with something in the future. So we're analyzing that as to the possibility to do so. Our staff in all the regions are doing what they can to assess drought conditions on our habitats and are responding where they can to install, maintain, and even deliver water to guzzlers. Our law enforcement section just hired 4 new officers. They start post on Monday. When and if they survive post, we'll introduce them here. That will be sometime in December. As far as the archery hunt went for that group, relatively quiet from an enforcement standpoint. I know there's been a lot of conversations with the new baiting law and how that would affect enforcement. Thus far, it's been something of a quiet event that we're tracking and monitoring. Our outreach section has the state fair that they're going to be working on. It starts September 9th and goes through the 19th. The wildlife building will feature an exhibit about the DWR's hard work through the wildlife migration initiative. Our waterfowl section, a lot of our WMAs have very low water, including Clear Lake, Willard Spur, Salt Creek, and public shooting grounds. So we're monitoring those conditions and doing what we can there. Based on our camera and monitoring data, chukar and rabbit numbers are down this year. September 1st, lots of our upland game hunts begin, including dusky and rough grouse, ptarmigan, cottontail, snowshoe hare, band-tailed pigeon, dove, all those. We also have some youth hunts that start in September. So get the kids out. Great opportunity to do that. The youth chukar hunt will be September 18th to the 20th, with pen-reared birds being released around the state at locations that'll be posted on our website here shortly. There is also the northern zone, I should say, youth waterfowl hunt, and that's September 18th. So make sure you know and understand those boundaries, but get your kids out, and great opportunity there. So that's it.
I just have a question. There was a news release on a Jensen purchase up north between two WMAs on that. I mean, that pulled up the maps. That looks like a great purchase. Is there any information on that, or?
Is there someone here from the division that can update this group on that? I'm only familiar with the purchase, but Ben Nadolski. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you. Ben Nadolski, Northern Region Supervisor. Yeah, the purchase took place. You saw the press release. It was a kind of a long time coming. Thankfully, we had some good relationships with neighboring landowners, but it helps adjoin two big chunks of property that we own, and will definitely help with not only waterfowl hunting, but also some upland opportunities in the future too. So we're really excited about it, and thankful for all the support we had, both from the family and from organizations that help support it. So, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Director, sounds like there's a lot going on, and we thank the division for that update and everything that you're working on. Just a couple things to go over up on the table right there below the monitor. There's comment cards. If you would like to give a comment, please fill that out and give it to one of our young ladies there. Also, it's been a while since we've met in person. We no longer take questions from the public. So if you do want to have a comment, make sure you fill that comment card out. With that, we will go to agenda item number 5, fur bear and bobcat harvest. We like to ask Darren if he has anything else that he'd like to add to that.
Not at this time, no. I'm here for questions and anything the board needs.
Thank you. All right, so time for questions from the board.
Gary.
You had a proposal from Central Region to not, to leave alone the colored lands, at least for the period of the study. How do you feel about that?
I could address that now, Gary. That'll actually be on the next agenda item. So I'm happy to speak to that, but maybe we could wait.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, any other questions from the board? Questions from the rack chairs?
I'll ask the question that might help when I report on one of the motions that came from the Northern Region. But I'd asked earlier, Darren, about the cap on the permits for bobcats and what that cap was and how I guess what it's set at now and what we're looking
Right.
at.
Last year there were 6,490 bobcat permits. That was the cap on permits. The bobcat plan is pretty prescriptive. It says if you meet these conditions, then these are the actions you take. And so as a result of the metrics we saw in the bobcat harvest last year, we're recommending removing that cap. We are still leaving the season short by a week. But we are proposing removing the cap and then allowing people up to 6 permits, and where it was 4 last year per individual.
Thank you. Any other questions from rack chairs? All right, we'll ask the director to summarize the comments that we've received from the public.
Thank you, Kevin. On agenda item number 5, fur bear and bobcat harvest recommendations, we had 46 comments. The vast majority of those comments were opposed to the division's proposal. 44 either strongly or somewhat disagreed. The major themes in that we summarize here are: predators have a right to live on the landscape. They're an important part of our ecosystem. We don't have the right to kill harmless animals, leave them alone. Trapping is cruel and inhumane. Other factors such as drought and wildfire already are impacting bobcat populations. We should let them recover and stop harvesting so many. No science to back our proposed harvest recommendations, and opposed to trophy hunting. We do have 3 comments as well, that comment cards from the public. Looks like we have 4 comment cards.
Darren, do you have any comments to the discussion on any of those comments that we received?
Yeah, we, as an agency, we deal with a broad base of different stakeholders, and people with these kinds of sentiments certainly are part of the population in Utah, and we definitely take their input. Our approach to trapping has been to provide regulations in order to allow this activity to occur, and so we do have a highly regulated trapping program in the state. In terms of bobcats specifically, and fur bearers more generally, typically the public who participates in trapping doesn't take enough animals to have an overall effect on population writ large. There just aren't enough individuals that participate. Typically, the things that drive bobcat populations are going to be prey-based. So when we see small mammal populations cycle, typically we'll see bobcat populations cycle with that. So our metrics are sensitive to that, looking at females in the harvest, juveniles in the harvest, and overall adult survival. And the other is for bobcats is pelt price. And so as pelt prices increase, people tend to get interested, and we sell a lot more trapping permits. And usually what happens is that we sell a lot, people realize it's harder than they thought it was, and it drops off in the following years. And as pelt price drops, that those numbers typically come down too. So that's kind of the 30,000 foot look at trapping.
One more question. They hit on the science. Can you speak a little bit to the science?
Yeah, we rely on, so there's an association of fish and wildlife agencies that represent North America and some South American states, in Canada, the United States, Mexico, primarily, that put out a best management practices book for trapping, and we've relied heavily on that. And so that's a science-based. They're going out, they're conducting studies on trapping. They're looking at, what's the best type of trap to use in order to ensure that if you catch an animal you're not intending to catch, that it can be released unharmed in most cases. And so our regulations reflect those desires. We want to try to limit incidental take to the point where a person is taking the animal they intend to take and not harming other animals they don't intend to.
Thank you.
Would it be all right if I made a comment? I just, I appreciate the comments that came in. They were well thought out, and that is this process that we get comments from the public. And so I really do appreciate people that took the time to share their feelings. A lot of them are pretty passionate about it. And I think the director kind of highlighted the theme within a lot of those comments. But I think the thing we also need to consider is we're tasked with managing all species, all the protected species, not just bobcats and predators. And if these numbers are left unchecked, especially with bobcats, they can decimate some of the other species. And so it falls on all of us to manage sensibly in a common sense approach the numbers to all these species. And so I think that is what the management plan is currently trying to do, and I think that's what Darren's proposal is attempting. So anyway, but I just want to make the comment. I do appreciate the input.
Thank you. I'd like to give time to our rack chairs to give us a summary of their motions, and let's go ahead and start with Justin Oliver.
Yeah, in the Northern Rack, we had 2 motions on this agenda item. The first one was to accept the fur bearer and bobcat harvest recommendations as presented, except leave the current cap in place. That was the reason for my question, and that passed 6-3. Those 3 who were in opposition, their reason for voting against was they did not want to lift the cap. After that motion, we then had a motion to recommend to the Wildlife Board to look into non-resident fur bearer licenses and into a draw for beaver trapping in currently closed areas, and that passed unanimously.
Thank you. Brett?
Yes, in the Northeast RAC, we had a motion to accept the division's proposal as presented, and it passed unanimously.
Thank you. Brock?
Yeah, the Central Region had a motion to accept the division's recommendations as presented, and that passed unanimously.
Thank you. Kent?
In the Southeast region, we had a couple of motions. The first one was to ask the division to consider setting up a system, whether it's depredation tags or what, to allow public trappers to take beaver when they become a nuisance in areas that are closed to beaver trapping. And that passed 10-2. The second motion was to accept the remainder of the division's recommendations as presented, and that passed 11-1.
Okay, and I'll just add a little to that, having attended that meeting. I think there's definitely areas where the division has focus areas to increase beaver and has done a really good job in that. And the discussion was that at times there becomes a nuisance beaver, and they wanted the public to be able to go in and individually remove some of those, but in conjunction with the division and be a helpmeet in that. And that's kind of what that motion was. Braden?
In the Southern RAC, we had a motion to accept the division's proposals as presented, and that passed unanimously.
Thank you. All right, so we'll go ahead and go to the comments from, as I call your name, please come up and give your comment. I have Joni, and then she will be followed by Wade Garrett. Oh, thank you. So you will have 3 minutes, and you will see a timer there.
I do want to comment that I oppose increasing hunting permits for bobcats or lengthening the hunting season for bobcats. So my comments were going to be similar to what you said the vast majority of the public comments were. But I think I'm going to change my comments to respectfully disagree with what Wade Heaton said. These animals have regulated their populations for hundreds of thousands of years before organized human management of wildlife. So, and in addition to that, I just want to say that if the majority of if Utah public were allowed to vote on this issue, I believe that they would vote not to allow trapping on Utah public lands, as many other states and countries have done already. Thank you.
Thank you, Joni. Wade, and he'll be followed by Sierra.
Is that on? Yes. Wade Garrett, Utah Farm Bureau. Thank you, Chairman and Board, for the opportunity to present. Utah Farm Bureau supports the trapping numbers as presented. We think, as Director Heaton does, that it is important. He said a lot of my comments that we manage predator base as well as other species in the state. So we appreciate Darren's time and his staff in bringing the recommendations forward and working with agriculture. The predator base also likes agriculture species as well as wildlife species. So we're grateful for those recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Sierra Nelson, Utah Wool Growers Association. I appreciate the time to address the board today. I'd like to echo what Wade said and let you know that Utah wool growers support the division's recommendations. And I also want to put that while we have had populations manage themselves, we've got a huge influx of urban-rural interface conflict, and that puts pressure on those species, and it really means that we need to manage them better. So we support the division, we support Darren's work and his staff and the time that they put into it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sierra. Cody Bassett, followed by Kirk Robinson.
Hello, my name is Cody Bassett, representing Utah Trappers Association. We just want to support the recommendations by Darren and from the Bobcat management plan. We know that it's worked very well in the past, the Bobcat management plan. We want to continue to see it do what it does, and we support the recommendations. On the boards, we recommended on a couple issues was the beaver. One of the big problems, a lot of these areas have been closed for 15, 20 years, and we just want to see a opportunity where these areas be opened up. Just opening up to like a draw unit in essence, because if we open it up open season, we feel that these populations will be in essence annihilated, and we want to see a draw system implemented so trappers can go in and harvest these animals, but keeping intact the ecosystem that they've provided by the beaver management plan. And then the other comment was on the fur bearer license. We would like to see make it required for non-resident trappers to buy a fur bearer's license. It's not fair to Utah trappers, and it's not fair to Utah wildlife that they come in unchecked. We just would like to see, pretty much non-resident trappers be required to buy a fur bearer license. Thank you.
Kirk Robinson will be followed by Sunday Hunt.
Good morning. Kirk Robinson, representing Western Wildlife Conservancy. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this morning. I guess I can't ask why you've done away with the public question part of the program, but it seems to me to be a mistake. A lot of times I have questions to try to clarify my understanding of what's being proposed, and it makes it hard to comment intelligently if I don't have that understanding. So I can't imagine why you'd want to do that. And I don't know if this body decided to do that or what or why, but whoever's in charge of that, I think you should reconsider. Another thing, it was a nice summary. Welcome, Director Shirley, to your new job. I'm going to try to make it harder for you. It was pretty interesting to listen to all those comments. Nobody asked whether or not the bobcat population was threatened. I don't think anyone seriously believes that they're about to go extinct because of the, quote, management by DWR through trapping. What they were concerned about was alleged cruelty and inhumaneness. And I noticed that nobody cared to address that. It was ignored or overlooked. And I think there's a real serious question there, especially given trap check times. Nobody here would want to have their dog in a trap. Or what's the check time now? Is it 48 or 72 hours? I've forgotten.
Do you want to address that, Darren?
Sorry, that was a question. I wasn't supposed to ask a question.
So it's 48 hours for non-lethal sets and 72 for a lethal set.
Okay, well, when I think about it, I have to believe that the animals are suffering in some fashion for 48 hours. If your dog were caught in a trap out there and left alone for 48 hours, I guarantee you it would suffer. It wouldn't have water, wouldn't have food. It might be cold. It might be subject to predation. And those traps do hurt sometimes. So I think you're ducking the serious issue here that most Utahns are concerned about. And you're supposed to represent the entire population, not just the Trapper Association. So I think you're derelict on that score. And also, I disagree with what you said, Mr. Heaton. Basic ecology tells us that these various species adjust their numbers to what's going on in the ecosystem. Right now, we're under a drought, so all species will suffer as a result. And that will include bobcats. And nobody has given any scientific evidence whatsoever that we need to manage them through lethal means. No evidence has been presented. I don't think you have any, to be perfectly honest. I think that's just, something you all, hey, I represent an organization. They don't get any more time than 3 minutes anymore?
3 minutes.
Well, no, there was a time when they did get more. Okay, you've heard me. Thank you.
Thanks. Sunday?
Good morning. My name's Sundays Hunt. I'm the Utah State Director for the Humane Society United States and a resident of the state. On behalf of the organization and our supporters in Utah, I ask this board to oppose the recommended changes to the 2021 bobcat hunting season. The DWR's recommendations will likely result in significant jeopardy in Utah's bobcats and are not supported by the majority of Utahns. Recent polling shows that the majority of Utah voters do not support the recreational hunting and trapping of bobcats. DWR's data show that hunters cause most bobcat mortalities in Utah, primarily through trapping, with hunters killing an average of 1,772 bobcats annually from 2010 to 2020. Moreover, DWR's data shows a declining trend in bobcats killed by hunters and trappers, perhaps because trappers realize they are losing, not making money. The world for fur market is hitting rock bottom. Additionally, hunting and trapping are not necessarily to keep bobcat populations in check, as they are self-regulating and limited by other factors, including the amount of available prey. Hunting and trapping bobcats also orphans their dependent kittens, leaving them to die of dehydration, starvation, predation, or exposure. Even without human-caused mortality, bobcats face additional threats from disease, habitat loss, and the effects of climate change. Rather than hunting and trapping bobcats, we should protect them. Bobcats also have significant ecotourism value beyond their pelt prices. A study in 2017 calculated that in just 1 year's time, a single bobcat in Yellowstone National Park was valued at more than $300,000, a figure 1,000 times greater than a bobcat's pelt price of $315. That one bobcat led to the hiring of wildlife watching guides, enabled photographers to sell their prints, and stimulated other employment in the area. Because of the challenges the bobcats face for survival, such as loss of habitat, fluctuations in prey, and competition with other carnivores, there is absolutely no justification for the addition of hunting and trapping mortality. Therefore, we oppose DWR's 2021-2022 fur bear recommendations that increase the number of bobcats that may be killed and extend the bobcat hunting season by an additional week. We also ask this wildlife board to similarly oppose these recommendations and protect bobcats from unnecessary and cruel hunting and trapping. Thank you.
Thank you. Darren, do we have any clarification on any of the comments?
I guess the only thing that I'd add as I was sitting there thinking is just realize that all of our recommendations are based on a plan that was taken out to constituency that we tried to get a good cross section of different interest groups, and that plan was a consensus of those individuals who sat on that committee. And so that's where these recommendations come from. And certainly as we readdress plans, we'll continue to do that in the future. So we have a lot of interests in the state, a lot of people that come at these issues from different perspectives, as you heard today. And we try to make our plans as science-based and as representative of all of the interest groups as we possibly can.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and summarize the motions. As stated by the RAC chairs, the Central Region, Southern Region, and Northern Region passed this unanimously. The Northern Region wanted to leave an exception to leave the current cap in place, and that passed 6 in favor, 3 opposed. They also wanted to look into fur bearers for non-resident fur bearer license into a draw for beaver trapping in areas that are currently closed, and that passed unanimously. And the Southeastern region wanted the division to look into the public to participate in harvesting beavers in areas that were closed to trapping rather than using professional trappers, and that passed 10 in favor, 2 opposed. We'll now open it up for the board discussion.
I just have a question. Is a non-resident trapping license something, I mean, a lot of that comes from the legislature. Is that something we deal with, or is that somebody?
So currently, I think what we're talking about really is non-residents who come in to trap non-protected species like coyotes don't need to have a license. And correct me if I'm wrong. That's what you're talking, right? But yeah, that would be something that if we wanted to require the current license, the difficulty is that the division doesn't regulate the take of coyotes in the state. It's not an animal that falls under our jurisdiction. And so it'd be difficult for us to require a license for their take. So yeah, I guess the answer to the question is it would be probably something the legislature would have to address.
But a non-resident who catches a bobcat in us needs a permit.
Right.
They just don't have a license because of the, okay.
Correct. They'd need a license to trap protected animals, but not non-protected. Coyotes is probably the main thing we're talking about here.
Okay. And adding another draw, man, I don't know the logistics of that.
Yeah, on the beaver stuff, I think, we've had a chance to think and talk about this a little bit. I honestly, I think that's something that each region could address individually, similar to what we do with depredation pools. If we needed beavers to be removed from an area because they're flooding a road, the region may decide to relocate those animals. They've got projects going on, or that certainly could happen at a regional level. And we could try to make that, like draw a name out of a hat, kind of a little bit more opportunity based. In the past, typically sometimes we'll contact wildlife services. Other times we'll contact a trapper that we know can do the job, kind of thing. But I suggest that's where we leave it.
Don't we do that with problem bears? Animal damage has some,
Yeah.
and we have some other resources that we can call on to.
Yeah. So if we needed a bear, we try to contact a hunter with a permit and just go through the list, that kind of thing. So we certainly do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Could I ask a question? Sorry, Darren, if you want to stay back up there. I know you addressed this, or seemed like you did in your presentation, but just so it can be on the record for the meeting. What parameter, what have we hit? What trigger have we hit within the management plan that is mandating lifting the cap?
So we have three metrics we look at. We look at percent females in the harvest, and we want that to be between 40 and 45%. We look at juveniles in the harvest, which juveniles would indicate reproduction has taken place and that there's an increase in the number of bobcats available. We also look at adult survival, and if we have a higher adult survival, that indicates that those animals are surviving. They're not showing up in the harvest in great enough numbers to see a decline. And so those are the three things we look at. Two of those metrics, I'd have to check real quick, Wade, were within the parameters. One was just below, right on the bubble. And the plan, again, is prescriptive. It just says if two out of the three parameters are within the management objectives, then we return to a baseline, which is 6 permits, no cap. Since we had that one that was out a little bit, we opted to not add the 2 weeks back to the season, just 1 week on the front end. So, and if you want the exact numbers, Wade, I certainly can do that.
That's perfect. I just wanted that to be in the meeting, just so that there is some science, there is some reason, there is a method to this. So thank you.
Darren, I've got a question if I could. The cap was around 6,400. Is that
right? Yeah.
It was 6,400, and if I heard the amount of the number of bobcats taken average around somewhere north of 1,700.
The cap was set at 80% of the total permits sold the year before we put the cap in place. So 8,300-ish is what we'd expect to sell without a cap, somewhere in that neighborhood.
So it sounds like we sell quite a few more permits than animals taken. Is that?
That's correct. In fact, it's interesting when you look at trapper numbers, but a lot of people buy these permits and then don't even go afield. So I think they're buying them to kind of hedge their bets, and they have the intent to go. And again, pelt price drives this a lot, and so people think I'm going to go make a lot of money and trap a lot of bobcats, and then they realize that if they don't have the experience, it's really a difficult thing to do. So without the cap, though, I'd expect us to be somewhere above 8,000 Bobcat permits purchased and quite a bit fewer than that taken.
Thank you.
I just want to. Maybe it doesn't want me to speak. I just want to speak for the wool growers. You know, these bobcats can devastate a lot of baby lambs, and if they're not kept in check, and if they'll take lambs, they'll surely take fawns. And I, you know, with this push we're having to save the deer, I think that I just want to applaud the division on their management. I've sat on the rack for years and felt bad when the bobcats went the other way, when the permits went the other way, but it goes up and down just like they do. So I applaud the division's recommendation.
Go ahead.
I'll make a motion that we accept the division's proposal as presented.
I'll second it.
Okay. That's stated clear, Stacy. Okay. Any questions on the motion? All right, let's start with Bryce.
Yes.
Carl?
Yes.
Brett?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Wade?
Yes.
Gary?
Yes.
Unanimous? Motion passes. All right, let's go to agenda item number 6, Cougar recommendations. Do you have anything to add from different than
One
what
thing
was
I
in the
think is
video?
important to just clarify, we clarified it in the last 3 racks, but there was a little bit of a date error in the original presentation on the closure on the LaSalle's, the Book Cliffs, and the San Juan. And let me just pull that really quick. For when hounds are no longer allowed to be used on those units. I just want to make sure I get the date right. So those units would close to the use of hounds beginning April 13th, 2022. In the original presentation, I believe we put the 14th. So that would have allowed 1 day of overlap, and that was not the intent. Other than that, no, we don't have any additional changes.
Thank you. Just to clarify, so if the division's recommendation, that will be covered, those dates will be covered.
Right. Yeah. So that's our new recommendation. So if the board wants to vote for the balance or the presentation, that would be included.
Thank you. Questions from the board?
I'm
sure there'll be questions.
Darren, I'm confused about last year we was on these harvest objective units, we were able to take harvest, kill 2 lions on these units,
Yeah.
each person. Is that been stricken?
No, that's still the case. So a person could take 2 lions per year with various combination of permits. And I tried to clarify that in the presentation. That also be clarified in the guidebook. We tried to make that a little simpler to understand. But essentially, if you were to draw a limited entry permit for a limited entry season on one of those units, you could then, in addition to that permit, you could purchase either a spot and stock or harvest objective permit. You could buy 2 harvest objective permits and hunt any open unit, or you could purchase a spot and stock and then 1 other kind of permit. But yeah, 2 lions can be taken.
As I read this, I can't find it. It's it's stricken, but I'm sure it's there. I'm just not finding it.
Let me double check. You asked me earlier about that, and I didn't see that in the rule proposal, but I'll double check the red line. Maybe Greg could take a quick look at that. I know he's here. That would not be our intent if that happened. So.
So I've got a question, Darren. It was in the video presentation, but just ask that you kind of talk a little bit about the legislation and what the directive of the director is.
Certainly. So we've seen a lot of changes to lion management over the last couple of years, and probably the biggest change is legislation that recently passed last year. That requires the division director to take immediate action whenever ungulate populations on a given unit fall below the management population objectives, providing that the division can determine that predators are contributing to that decline in numbers. And so that's the legislation indicates. So that puts some responsibility on the division director. As a result of that, the division revised our predator management policy in order to give our biologists guidance on how to make those decisions and how to make those recommendations to the director for him to take action. And that policy came around last summer when we did Cougar recommendations. For those of you who are new on the board, and I'm sure the rest of you remember, normally we don't take policies through a RAC and board public process. But we felt like this one was important to get public input on, and that did pass through that process, and the board passed that policy. So the policy encompasses a lot of different aspects of predator management, but in terms of cougars and the subject today, there are really two instances where the division would have some concerns about potential predator effects on those populations. The first is fairly obvious, and that is when we can determine that cougar mortality on mule deer, for example, is high enough that it's a significant cause of mortality and adds to the overall decline in a population. We have really good collar data on our big game in Utah, and many units in the state have mule deer on the air with GPS collars through a study that we're partnering with BYU on. And when those animals die, those collars give us an indication that they're not moving anymore. The BYU and division team will go out and determine cause of mortality on those animals. And on some units like the Manti, we saw cougar mortality as the single most frequent cause of adult deer mortality on that unit. We saw adult survival. Kobe might have to correct me. I think it was somewhere in the 78% survival in past years with healthy deer. That doesn't indicate habitat concerns. We've implemented high quotas, and last year predator management plan, now we're seeing 97% survival of adults. So that's a fairly easy prescription for a biologist to look at and make. The other instance where we might recommend a predator management plan is when we see short-term large declines in mule deer numbers due to habitat factors like drought, for example. That's why a lot of the units that we're looking at today qualified for predator management plans. Typically what happens, and the literature shows that you'll see a decline in mule deer numbers that's right. It could be related to hard winter, could be related to drought, but your predator densities will remain constant for a period of time. Eventually they'll also decline if the prey population doesn't increase. But there's that window of time that could be as much as 8 years when you're carrying a lot of predators and they're preying on a smaller prey base, and they can actually depress that population and prevent it from coming back sooner. And so we look at that as well. The objective there would be to decrease the density of predators on that unit over a shorter amount of time, and then let those two populations balance out as they come back. So that's sort of the predator management question in big nutshell. It's a little longer than maybe we needed to be.
Thanks, Darren. Any other questions from the board?
I've got one, Darren. Through the public process, there was a proposal brought out to not allow the take of any cougars with collars,
right,
through the hunting process. And I know that information we're getting off those cougars are just invaluable to what we're getting there. But my question is how cougars do we have collared right now presently? Males and females, if you got that data.
Good question. So USU is collared, I think 44 total on their study on the cache, the manti, and the book cliffs. Of those, we've seen obviously some mortality and some collar failures. I'm trying to remember. I think they might have 19 that are currently giving us locations out of they've collared those number of lions over 3 years. Of those 44, we've seen about 10 taken by hunters in the study. When hunters take a lion, we get out and try to put the collar back on a different lion. Our approach to this has been to just discourage hunters from taking collared lions, but not to make it illegal to do so. And I don't want to steal the houndsman's thunder. I know they have a proposal today that they'll want to make in their comments, but so just more generally, obviously we can talk more about it after that as well. For this specific recommendation, we're talking about units. I believe they have 6 lions on the air so far. We're going to try to get 30 in those 6 units that they're proposing to do the study on. And we right now those units are not under predator management, so the deer numbers seem to be good. I guess my only concern more generally would be we want to make sure that these kind of regulations aren't driving our management or tying our hands if we need to make decisions to affect those populations. So for example, if one of those units, if we saw some predator caused declines in mule deer, we'd want the flexibility to be able to go ahead and lift those restrictions. But certainly we can talk more about it after they make their proposal. I think they'll get some details that maybe you haven't seen so far.
So with that in mind, would that, if those collared lions were totally protected, would that skew the study?
No, it depends on the objectives of the study. So for the USU study, we weren't looking at cause-specific mortality of lions. We have pretty good data on how, what kills mountain lions out there on the landscape. And so really it's just a sample size question. And as long as you can continue to get those collars put back out, the biggest disadvantage just is in the time and the effort that it takes to get a collar on a lion. But we can certainly do that if we need to.
So a lion that's caused problems that gets relocated, does it have a collar?
If we relocate a lion, we do try to mark it in some way, and it kind of depends on what we have available. A lot of times we'll put some old used deer collars on them just to kind of keep track of them, see where they go. Typically lions that get in trouble, if they kill a domestic animal or livestock, they don't get relocated. They're euthanized. So any lion we'd move would be a lion that shows up in town and just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And typically we would try to track those in some way.
Okay. And so say it was a lion that had been coming into town, and you relocated with a collar. Under this proposal, it would then be protected?
If it was under this proposal, if it was within those 6 units, it would be. But once it leaves the units, it wouldn't. The other thing that they're proposing is that any depredation, any lions that are causing livestock depredation would not be prohibited from take, and essentially only hound hunting would be affected. So spot and stalk, if you just didn't see the collar on a spot and stalk hunt, you wouldn't be in jeopardy there. I think the other thing, I guess, just the other concern that we have as an agency is just, making things more complicated for people, and this certainly complicates things. But maybe I'll leave it at that unless there's other questions.
Thank you. Any more from the board? All right, let's go to rack chairs. Any questions? Okay.
Darren, if this proposal, if we did say prohibit the taking of a collared lion, is there already something in place as far as a fine or what that would be, or would that still have to come?
Probably a good question for Jay. I don't know that we've had in-depth discussion on exactly what that violation would be. But if they were prohibited, the rule does allow us to prohibit the take of collared lions by declaring it in the guidebook. So we can certainly do it. But maybe the director would like to address.
Yeah, I can speak to that. That we would already have that covered in rule and in code. So just being a violation of what the board ordered and in rules. So.
All right. Any other questions from the rack? All right. We'll have the director summarize our comments from the public.
On agenda item number 6, Cougar recommendations and rule amendments for the 2021-2022 season, we had 48 comments. Again, the vast majority of those comments strongly or somewhat disagree with the division's proposal. 96% of those, 46 of them strongly or somewhat disagree. The major themes of those comments are that predators have a right to live on the landscape and they're an important part of our ecosystem. Cougars are being blamed for decreased big game populations. Research shows that killing more cougars won't improve big game populations. Science doesn't support our harvest recommendations. Other factors such as drought and wildfire are already impacting cougar populations. We should let them build and recover without additional harvest, and opposition to trophy hunting.
We'll have a rack chairs report on motions. Let's start with Braden.
All right, so the Southern Region RAC, we had a few motions on this. So the first motion we had is that we moved that the division prohibit the harvest of collared cougars on the 6 study units in the Central Region by the use of hounds for a period of 3 years. And that motion passed unanimously. We had an amended motion to that was asked that we would prohibit the harvest of collared cougars by the use of hounds statewide for the period of 3 years. And that amended motion failed with 3 in favor and 6 opposed. And just to clarify, that is what the Houndsman Association will propose here in just a minute. I think the other RACs also have motions on that. And then the final motion is that we accept the remainder of the division's proposals as presented, and that passed with 8 and 1 opposed.
Thank you. Kent?
There was also 3 motions in the Southeast RAC. The first one, we had a motion to adopt the Houndsman's Association proposal to prohibit the take of collared lions on units that are not in predator management. And that would not include spot and stalk hunters. That motion was strictly limited to hound hunters. And that motion was unanimous. And then the second motion to ask the director to consider changing the Beaver East unit from a predator management unit, but keep the quota high enough to meet recommendations made by the district biologist. There was quite a bit of discussion on that, and there's a lot of people who are concerned about being able to hunt there and over harvest of cats that were on that unit and damaging what some of the houndsmen that were there, I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, but they were concerned about the trophy potential on that and reducing that potential. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think it was right on the bubble of being in the predator management until they felt that it was under the director's purview, but they wanted more discussion that if the director had a little bit of leadway that they look at that.
Yeah, that's what I remember in the motion. I just wanted to make sure that was the reasoning for it. Yeah. My notes are home. I apologize. And the final motion was to accept the remainder of the presentation. On that motion, by the way, passed 10-1. And then the final motion was to accept the remainder of the recommendations presented by the DWR, and that was unanimous.
Thank you. Brock?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We also had three motions. The first motion was to not allow the take of cougars within the 6-unit study area until the cougar management plan is addressed again in 3 years. That motion passed 11-1. We had a motion to recommend that Director's Office extend the cougar spot and stock hunt beyond December 31st. So it coincided with all of the, say, late season cow elk hunts. That motion passed unanimously. We also had a motion to accept the remainder of the motions as presented, and that motion passed 10-2.
Thank you. Brett?
Yes, in the Northeast region, we had our first motion was to prohibit the take of collared lions by hounds statewide. We felt that the 6 units would complicate things in the understanding of it. So the proposal was statewide with hounds to prohibit the take, and that passed unanimously. We had 2 motions regarding the Beaver East, both attempting to not have that go into harvest objective, similar to the other discussion. Both of them motions failed for lack of a second. And then the final motion was to accept the remainder of the packet as presented, and it passed unanimously.
Thank you. Justin?
Yes, in the Northern Rec, we also had 3 motions. The first one was a motion to, says we recommend not allowing the take of collared lions statewide with the use of hounds other than for depredation or spot and stock. And that motion failed 3-6. Those against felt that they wanted to follow the division's recommendation. Our agriculture representatives also felt that that went against an agreement that they had when they were helping with collar lions, if I've understood that correctly. Second motion was I move that we not allow the take of collared lions in the 6 study areas in the central region, with the exception of for depredation or spot and stock. And this passed 8-1. The one against felt like we don't protect any other collared animals throughout the state and didn't want to do these either. And then the last motion was to accept the remainder of the cougar recommendations, and that passed unanimously.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I missed a motion. Can I back up?
Please.
Sorry, it was on my second page. So we did have one more motion, and there was a motion that we move that the spot and stock season dates to coincide with the cougar harvest objective season dates. And that motion passed unanimously. Apologize about that.
You're fine. Thank you. All right, we will now go to comments from the audience. We will first start with Joni, followed by Kirk Robinson.
Okay. Hi, I'm Joni. I didn't introduce myself before. I'm an ecology student at the University of Utah. I'm also a member of Western Wildlife Conservancy, and I volunteer for Humane Society of the United States. So I'm opposed to any increase in cougar hunting, and I know the majority of Utahns are as well. Looking at the history of cougar hunting permits and harvest data from this agency, there has been an increase in cougar hunting for at least the past 30 years, with a dramatic increase last year. The decisions to enable cougar killing is supposed to reflect science-based strategy to achieve goals set by the human values of the people of Utah. As wildlife board members, you get to judge what values we impose on our wildlife. It's hard for me to understand why Utah keeps increasing hunting permits for cougars. Management decisions are supposed to be science-based to achieve goals set by Utahns' values. If Utahns' values have recently changed dramatically, it could explain the upward trend in cougar hunting permits issued. but the opposite is true. Those who hunt and raise livestock are decreasing in prevalence. More and more Utahns value wildlife for non-consumptive purposes like photography and ecotourism. Both of these facts are well documented. The primary reason given for increasing cougar hunting is to increase deer and elk populations. Like Darren mentioned, deer and elk are suffering from complex issues like habitat loss and drought. So trying to manage these problems with a simplistic solution like decimating cougars is not a good strategy. And this is evidenced by the example of the state of California. They do not allow sport hunting of cougars, and they report that their ungulate populations have not suffered because of it. So as the Wildlife Board, you get to assess what Utah's values are. I know Utah values nature, wildlife, and biodiversity. We should be using science-based strategy to conserve wildlife and biodiversity. Please do not allow more cougar hunting permits to be issued for the upcoming season, and do not allow year-round cougar hunting. Thanks for considering my comment.
Thanks, Joni. Kirk, followed by Amy.
Kirk Robinson again for Western Wildlife Conservancy. I'm the founder and the director of the organization. I've been coming to meetings for 32 years. I'm sure that I've survived many of the staff people at DWR over the years. So I've seen a lot. What I see now happening is a system that's faltering. And you're not really serving the interests of the public of Utah. It's evident from what the director read. Now, many times I've been insulted and been told that I don't know about the science, etc. Let me tell you, I do know a thing or two about the science. I have a PhD in epistemology, and that includes all aspects of knowledge and belief and evidence. And in this connection, yes, there is science employed. Science is employed in setting management plans. But I'm wondering what science justifies it. All right. And I never hear anybody offer any science that justifies killing so many cougars. What's being offered as justification is the deer herds, the elk herds, the bighorn sheep herds. Yet we all know, if we know anything at all about ecology, that the carnivore numbers, populations will track the other numbers of the ungulates, the prey base. If you let them do it, sure, there's going to be a bit of a lag, but it can be done. Instead, now it looks like we're in for a perpetual war on cougars. How many were killed this last year? 650? Last time so many were killed, or even close to it, was in 97, I believe, 96. 97. This is unacceptable. This is not science, has nothing whatsoever to do with ethics. It does not respect the opinions of the people of Utah that you're supposed to serve. Everything is wrong with it. Now, I'm willing to work with you, Director Shirley, to see if we can arrive at some mutually agreeable solutions to some of these issues. But don't tell me it's all science-based when you can't cite any peer-reviewed published studies to support any of this stuff. Nobody ever does that. And I'll bet I can refute the hell out of what Darren has presented too, and maybe I'll do that and send it to all of you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Amy, followed by Corey Huntsman.
Hi, y'all. My name is Amy Mata, and I'm a volunteer with the Humane Society of the United States. I grew up in Western Davis County and attended the University of Utah, and a longtime resident of Salt Lake City. I wanted to speak with the board and thank you for allowing me this opportunity. I was on the website, your website, yesterday, and I see that one of the constituency goals specifically Objective C5, is for you to improve your understanding of how the broader public views and values wildlife and how it contributes to their quality of life, and take reasonable steps to address their needs, wishes, and priorities. So I am here fulfilling your objective to hear input from the public and my view on wildlife. I would like to encourage the board not to increase the number of permits to hunt cougars in Utah. And I'll tell you a story. So I was walking through Research Park right by Red Butte Creek. And it was dusk and there weren't many people around as it was in the evening. And I see an object run from the east to the west and down into the riverbed. And I thought, oh my gosh, that dog isn't on a leash. Its owner has lost control of its dog. But there was no one chasing after this animal. And I thought, oh my gosh, that was a cougar. It made no sound whatsoever, like a ghost. Ooh, I'm getting goosebumps. And I thought, how majestic, how fabulous that God put such a wonderful creature on this earth and I was just in awe. And I want to encourage, I wasn't scared. I'm not freaked out by wild animals. I have much respect for their power and their own right to be. But I don't know if I would have had that opportunity if it had been shot or trapped in a hunt. So I value having these wonderful animals in our state for those types of interactions. It was a wonderful experience in my life. Thank you for your time and good day.
Thank you. Corey, followed by Matt Farnsworth.
Corey Huntsman, thank you guys for your service on the Wildlife Board. We sure appreciate this opportunity to have our voices heard. Welcome, Bryce and Gary, and congratulations, Director Shirley. Look forward to working with you. As mentioned, we did recently partner with the DWR and BYU on a new Cougar study. The parameters of this study are within 7 units of the central region. One of those is Salt Lake Wasatch Front, so we're not including that in the proposal because there's not a hound season there. The 6 units are Wasatch Strawberry, Wasatch Temp, Cascade, Oker Stansbury East, Nebo, and Nebo Face. None of these units are in a predator management plan, like Darren said. There are, however, 3 units in a bighorn predator management plan, but having GPS capabilities on lions in bighorn country would only benefit the sheep in depredation instances. We're proposing that we don't kill collared lions on those 6 units for the next 3 years. And that wouldn't include, like was mentioned, depredation or spot and stalk hunts. The current cougar management plan that was implemented in 2015, it expires 2025. That's 3 hunting seasons from now. I think this will give us some really valuable data if we can keep the same animals online for a 3-year period and help us. I know there's not a perfect management plan on any species, but it'll help us get a little closer to that target and maybe get a little bit more appropriate predator to prey balance in Utah. One thing that's been brought up as we ran it through the racks was, would it take any opportunity from sportsmen? And I don't think so. We've been mindful of this from the get-go. So we've been collaring lions in rugged, roadless terrain. We haven't been cutting tracks on roads like we would if we had a hunter with us. We've been hiking in about as rough a terrain as we can navigate in. We're talking 30 lions on 7 units. Right now we've got 6 collared, 5 of those are females, 1 tom. If we continue that ratio throughout the remainder 30 collars, probably looking at 5 toms on 7 units. I don't think that's taken a lot of opportunity away from sportsmen, but I do believe the data gain would be significant. As mentioned, it passed the RACs unanimous on all 5, and we had 2 opposed throughout all the voting RAC members. You guys have any questions for me?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Matt, followed by Sierra Nelson.
Thank you. I'm Matt Farnsworth, representing the Utah Houndsman Association today. I want to start off thanking you guys for your service, and it's good to be back in front of you again. Been a while, and I've missed some of you. But I'd also be remiss if I didn't thank Darren. He has went above and beyond to help us through this process this year, and it's cut off a lot of our frustration. I just want to extend that thank you to you. It really has helped. It's been appreciated. With some of the legislation change, I'd kind of like to break our letter that we sent out into 2 separate issues. There's been some confusion on some of those. Darren's helped square some of that away on our end, and I'd like to take a minute maybe to help on your end a little bit. The first couple I'd like to talk about are issues that the board can act on. The first one is the collar study we're partnering with. We fully support that collar study, and what Corey has said, he has the backing of the UHA on that, and we appreciate all the hard work that he, the division, and BYU have implemented so far on that. The second one is removing the remaining harvest objective units and moving them into a limited entry, or a term that's been familiar as a split. I know this, for those of you who've been on the board a while, we've went back and forth about this, primarily on the Ponce-Gonz unit. So part of the division statement regarding predator management, we have to have focused removal to be effective. Currently, 90% of the state is open to just about year-round harvest objective, where anybody can buy a tag, go anywhere in the state. By removing those units, it would force, removing those units from harvest objective, moving them to a limited entry structure, it would force the hunters to draw that tag to hunt that area, and move the harvest objective hunters to the areas that the division needs those harvests on the predator management units. And those are the 2 items I think that you guys could take action on. For the units that maybe you can't, I've watched myself, different organizations kind of get criticized a little bit for not going through the public process on some of our thoughts. So that's why I'm bringing these up here. It looks like I'm gonna have to talk fast. So we just asked the director to establish clear criteria on when a unit enters predator management and when it's removed, similar to any of the other management plans. Darren's done a great job explaining why it is the way it is. But we'd like to see those triggers take place to where if this happens, then this. If this happens, now it comes out. I think those clear triggers would help a lot. We talked a bit about the Beaver East. Having those clear issues or clear triggered would have resolved that issue.
10 seconds.
Yep. And lastly, the removal of public lands verbiage from the rule. I know that's a rule that came through legislation. There's been some confusion from livestock owners on that. We're not asking to remove livestock owners' ability on private land, just on public lands.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sierra, followed by Adrian Brown.
Good morning again. So several things. First, it'd be a rather simplistic thing to say that the comments that you got represent the majority of the people in the state of Utah. I find that rather hard to believe. While we do rather deeply value wildlife, we also like to eat and wear clothes. And that's where your agriculture comes into play. And I think people do value that. So having said that, a couple things. One, the Utah Wool Growers Association is partnered in this lion study, both financially, but also in the fact that we're feeding the cougars that you're studying a lot. When it comes right down to it, if there is a depredating cougar, it needs to be removed at some point, whether it's collared or not. And I understand how hard it is to go up there and chase down a lion and collar it. I've harvested 2 lions myself, and I'm going to be honest, one of them was collared. And when it fell out of the tree and had the collar on it, I almost died. But it is what it is. And the spot I took it from was right where sheep herds are all summer, and it had been depredating on them. And I'd go back and I'd do it again. I think the Utah Wool Growers Association very strongly opposes limiting taking collared lions. I know that it does skew your data. It's nice to say that you'd like to keep your collared lion there, you know, through the next 3 years and whatever, but that doesn't mean that it will be, even if it's not taken by sportsmen. It can die from other causes. All it does is give us additional data off another cat because they go back out and reuse the collar. The Utah Wool Growers Association is opposed to any reduction in tags, and we strongly urge you to issue more tags. We can't ask you enough for more help. I come before you every time we do this and beg you for it. And for every time that you've majestically seen a lion running through a field, you've never watched them sit there and rip something apart. Not just an animal, but your livelihood and your being. So with that, we beg you to not cut the tags. We beg you to issue more. We don't want you to cut the seasons. We're opposed to limiting the take of collared lions. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Adrian, followed by Sunday.
Hi, super nervous. I'm really sorry if I shake. So my name's Adrian Bound, and I'm a resident of Utah. I grew up in Spanish Fork City, so I know hunting. I get hunting. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to comment today on DWR's cougar hunt recommendations. First, we ask that hunters are not permitted to kill any collared cougars in the state of Utah so that researchers can accurately study cougars without interference. This data is incredibly valuable and can be used to inform future management decisions along with future research and studies. Secondly, we are opposed to the excessive quotas put forth by the division. Mounting evidence suggests that management approach of intense cougar population control to increase deer populations is less effective than one might expect. Research published by Dr. Hilary Cooley in 2009 found that heavy cougar harvest corresponds with increased immigration that more than compensates for cougar removal. More recently, a study published in 2020 by Drs. John Landre and Chris Papouchis found that deer populations in the state where cougars are not hunted show no significant differences in density and abundance compared to deer populations in state that allow cougar hunting when controlling for other factors. Instead of targeting cougars and other predators to boost big game species, we instead need to address climate issues such as droughts and wildfires, as well as habitat loss and fragmentation due to urban expansion. We ask that DWR reevaluate mule deer and bighorn sheep population objectives and set more realistic targets for the species that incorporate current habitat availability and climate factors. We further ask that DWR factor in the impacts of domestic livestock and disease transmission to wild populations instead of defaulting to killing more cougars. And finally, we ask that the DWR consider the myriad ecosystem services that cougars provide when establishing their hunt recommendations. These cats keep big game populations healthy while also promoting biodiversity. Cougars also predate on deer with chronic wasting disease, which improves the health of deer herds, which benefits hunters. Moreover, one recent study found that cougars actually help keep roadways safer by changing deer behavior and reducing deer vehicle collisions. These cats have much to offer for both Utah's hunting and non-hunting communities, and the hunting recommendations should reflect this reality. I'd also just like to say that there is a happy medium that we can find, and these current cougar recommendations I don't think are it. And I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you. Sunday, followed by Garrick.
I previously submitted my comments, so I'm actually going to not read what I had planned because I'd like to address the last two gals' comments. There is a happy medium. We should be able to come to some middle ground and a compromise. It shouldn't be all 100% or 100%. Let's try to get to a happy medium. It will require you guys to give, and we certainly will give. The other thing is, I completely get, I don't know if she's still in the room, every year I come and I hear her talk about the sheep. You will probably not picture me doing this, but we had, my parents purchased 300 acres and bordering Bryce Canyon in Tropic, Utah. At the time, it was a population of 309. I think when we moved in, we doubled the population. I've got 5 brothers, 5 sisters. And my job was to protect our ostriches at night from the cougars. So I would sleep in the Suburban with the rifle. I didn't know how to use the rifle, I don't think, but it was strictly to try to scare them off in the off chance that a cougar would come. So I totally get trying to protect your livestock, your sheep, your livelihood, because the ostriches was an investment and it was our livelihood at that time. Fortunately, I never had any issues. We did not rely on trophy hunters. We did not rely on hunters. I protected our stock, and I feel like that's the job of all of these farmers. My parents were farmers. My grandparents were farmers. Totally get where everyone's coming from in this room. My day job was the front desk clerk at Best Western Ruby's Inn. But I want to let you know that on her, where she said she doesn't think that we're representing the mass majority of Utahns, we just August 4th and August 5th paid over $5,000 to conduct a Titus Bond survey. And there were 900 likely general election voters that participated in this survey. And I'll briefly go through this. Utah wildlife officials, in fact, I'm going to send it to you guys, but the mass majority completely oppose the hunting and the proposals made. So I will forward this to all of your board, but all of our comments that you've heard have represented the mass majority of Utahns. So thank you for your
Thank you. Garrick, followed by Joan.
Thank you. Garrick Hall here representing the Utah Farm Bureau. We want to speak in favor of the recommendation. As all of you understand, and it's been said several times today, these cougars can be very damaging to our livestock industry, particularly to the sheep industry, but they'll affect other species as well. And I think over the years, the division has done a good job of trying to address those concerns. That they're not easy issues to solve. But I think in a good faith effort, you've worked with the livestock industry, and we appreciate that, trying to solve these issues. But they still exist. We still have problems, and so we support efforts to continue to try to manage cougars. We're not going to complain if tag numbers were increased. I'll agree with Sierra on that. But generally speaking, we're excited about the efforts of the division and want to continue to see these animals managed. One thing I would say on collars, as you debate that issue, I don't care what you do on hunting collared animals, as long as we can continue to take the ones that are depredating our livestock, whether collared or not. That needs to be part of the discussion. I think that's the intention, that we continue to be able to take those problem animals either way. And so I want that to be in your mind as you make that decision. But we support the recommendation. We ask for your support of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Joan, followed by Allison.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to address you. I'm just your everyday citizen. I'm a nurse and a social worker, and I live in Immigration Canyon. And I'm here to tell you one of the reasons I live in Immigration Canyon is I love the mountains, but I also love being around the wildlife, and I mean all wildlife. And as a citizen, I'm very concerned about the high quotas you have for cougars in your proposed plan right now. I agree very much with the past speakers that I would urge you to look for a compromise on some of these numbers. They are an important part of our ecosystems, cougars are, and I have not yet heard a lot of evidence-based data to support these high numbers. A question I would have is, what is your metrics for reducing the numbers? I'm not hearing this. And then finally, as just your everyday citizen, I'd like to have my viewpoints and values represented in how we make our wildlife decisions. And I'm not feeling that. I'm not hearing that. I'm hearing that we're really reacting to special interests. And I appreciate Sunday's testimony about the recent poll. I think the vast majority of Utah citizens do value wildlife, and we shouldn't be just catering to hunting or special interests like the wool growers, et cetera. Thank you for hearing my comments. I appreciate the time.
Hello, I'm Allison Jones. I was the biologist and executive director at Wild Utah Project for well over 20 years. And after I left last year, I went out on my own thing. I'm doing an LLC now, but I'm still in the game. It's great to be back in an in-person wildlife board meeting. I've kind of missed all you guys. But yeah, I'm still very focused on the science behind these management plans and proposals. The mission of Wild Utah Project while I was there was to provide the science behind wildlife and wildlands management for our managers and friends. And so on that note, I think it's awesome when the researchers and the houndsmen come together behind the proposal to not allow the collared animals to be taken in the hunt. I think that's really important for the studies that are underway. And in terms of studies underway, I was actually hoping for being able to ask a question.
So to address that, so we ask that the questions go through the RAC process.
Okay. Okay.
And
So the question I would have asked Darren, I was struck by, and I couldn't remember whether it was on the Manti, where there was only 78% deer survival, and then, up to the cougar take, and then it went up to 97%. And if this is true, this would be a study that would be needed to be published in the literature, because that's been referenced here today. There's very few studies that show that just by, hitting the predators hard, you can actually see results on the ground with your deer populations. The division knows full well that there's many factors working on our deer herds. Predators are just one of them. But our climate is changing, and it's not going to continue to be easy to say you're doing everything. You're working on habitat, you're working on herd objective numbers, you're working on the predator issue. As the habitat continues to be affected by a changing climate and population growth of humans continues to encroach on their habitat, we're going to more and more have to get down to the brass tacks that the habitat is decreasing, and we're going to have to focus more on these deer herd objectives and perhaps lower them to a new carrying capacity, and not, pretend that just by hitting the cougars hard, that's going to give you the results you want, especially when, by and large, the science has been talked about today is really not there in the published literature to support that. And other states are certainly, recognizing that. So that would just be my hope in the future, which I hope is not a grim one for our wildlife with climate change, but a hopeful one. And I thank you all for listening. And I think I'm the last one, huh?
Yeah. Thank you. Darren, is there any clarification on the comments from any of your staff?
A couple things came to mind. I heard a couple of comments about management plan objectives, and just wanted to remind the board that last year we did put quite an effort into readdressing our mule deer plan objectives as part of this process. We recognize that if that's going to be the driver of what we're doing with these populations, we need to double check and make sure our management objectives are realistic. And so those actually just passed through the RAC and board process. We made changes to reevaluate all the deer units in the state and made some recommendations along those lines. Beyond that, I'm certainly open to questions. If the board has specific questions about the comments, that might help guide the discussion.
Darren, just there was a comment about specific triggers to go in and out of that. Could you just?
We so when we wrote the predator management policy, we set up some sideboards for our district biologists to use to direct their decision making. But we felt like, given the diversity of habitats and terrain in the state, that putting hard triggers into a policy like that was really not a realistic way to go. And so what we've done instead is really place a lot of reliance on those district biologists out there in the field, knowing their districts, understanding the herd, the populations that they manage, and making good, solid recommendations based on what's going on the ground. So there is a little bit more variation than maybe what we're used to in some of our planning processes where we have hard triggers. But we felt like, given the nature of the complicated nature of predator management, that we needed to have that flexibility. So having said that, every time we have a predator management plan turned in, recommended by the regions and sent to the director's office, they do identify why that plan is being implemented, and usually by default those conditions would be an improvement in those conditions would be triggers to bring the predator management plan out of those things, bring it out of predator management and manage it under the plan again. We evaluate predator management plans biannually. So we look at all of them in each December and each July. December, following our body condition estimates that we look at for mule deer, we evaluate our predator management plans and try to determine if they're necessary or if they're working. And then again in July, after we have winter survival numbers and data from the previous hunting season, we look at them then too. So we're constantly looking at these. We are familiar with the literature, and we're keeping a close eye on our populations. We're 1 year into this new strategy the legislature has set up, and so we will keep an eye. And to be honest, the literature is fairly clear that if predator management works anywhere, it has to be sustained and it has to be targeted. And so the board should expect us to maintain these plans at least long enough to detect whether or not they're effective. And again, the idea is to target those removals on specific units.
Thank you.
Quick question, Darren. It seems like the majority of the callers we've got on lions right now have just been fairly opportunistic, just whenever we get a lion in a tree. You had mentioned lions that get in trouble, meaning that they're coming into town, they're being being in a place they shouldn't be.
Right.
Those are a lot of the lions that are getting collared.
Right.
My concern is, as we're talking about not allowing the take of collared lions, and I know you already mentioned this, I just want to confirm it in my mind. Lions that have depredated, lions that have killed livestock, they do not have collars put on them and are taken to a new place.
Right. If a lion in any way endangers a domestic animal, a person, livestock, they will not be relocated. They are euthanized if we can catch them and determine that they're the offending lion.
All right.
I had a question on these central units, that there's a push to protect these collared lions, this Wasatch 6 or 7 units. They said that they supported to take those lions if they depredate on livestock. Is that just during the grazing season, the 96-hour time, or would there be depredation tags issued for the off season?
That's a good question, Brett, that I don't think that we discussed. So, as you know, we've had collared lions on the cache, and we've had those lions kill sheep. And we sat down with the producers in that case, and said, hey, we'll go get these lions, and that would be our policy. But that was during the season. And some of those lions were subsequently taken by hunters following the season. So I don't think we talked much about that, Brett, but just off the top of my head, it'd be difficult to know if that colored lion in the middle of December was the same one. And I mean, we would know. As a policy matter, to be honest, if we knew a collared lion was killing sheep, we'd try to take it as soon as possible because we don't want to have to pay for additional losses. And if for some reason it wasn't captured, we'd continue that effort. I'm sure the houndsman would support us in doing that.
One thing that I would like to address is the comments that we've received today. They are very much on both ends of the spectrum. And I really appreciate the process that we have in Utah to have a forum where we can come and hear from both ends of the spectrum. I think that Utah has one of the greatest processes to be able to allow that we can come and hear that. As we have 7 board members who are very diverse in our own opinions and are asked to come together and make a vote. Every 6 months, as a wildlife board, we are encouraged to sit on some meetings where there's about 23 Western states who meet, and the wildlife commissions of those states discuss the issues that they are facing. As part of that, I would like to discuss a little bit of the comments today that Utah does allow the public take of lions. There are many states that have taken away that opportunity, but I want to clarify that they have not taken away the removal of those lions. What happens is that is then done by an agency, and what is lost in that is the transparency. Today, the division was very transparent in every harvest of every lion last year. And I, as difficult as it is to come up and have the diversity and all of the questions on both ends of the spectrum, they are there. And one thing that I don't want lost in that is that public transparency. I'm so grateful for that. As we hear those updates, we do hear how many of those lions in many of those states that don't allow public harvest that they are taking, that many of the public have no idea. And so I would share that at least in this process, we all have a voice, and I hope that voice is not lost.
I wanted to speak to that too, Mr. Chairman. I've spent a lot of time in public hearings the last month outside of this role in the Wildlife Board, and it's reminded me of one thing. What an awesome country we live in. And even outside of our wildlife process, the ability that we have to be able to come together and share our opinion. And today was very respectful. Even though we've got 2 very diverse groups that are very passionate about where they're at, I love the fact that they can come together and share their opinion. I agree with a lot of the comments on both sides of this issue, and I think it's important that we can sit together and talk about them. I may not agree with all of them, but I'll absolutely defend your right to be able to share them and be able to be a part of the process and influence the process. So I guess my point is I want to say thank you. Really, thank you for coming. Thank you for being a part of this. I also want to share that this process is more than just this meeting and just these few dozen comments that we've had. We receive hundreds of emails and dozens of phone calls. We have hours and hours of debate and discussion in 5 regional meetings throughout the state. This is a huge process where there are thousands of people that provide input for it. The avenue that we have that the director shared of the online commenting process is just one of many, many avenues. And so this is a very robust public process. And even though there was a 96% on one side in the online commenting, I would say it's far more evenly split in a lot of the comments that we receive. Anyway, just just want to applaud the process and the fact that we all get to sit around and talk about issues like this and can do it fairly respectfully. Appreciate you.
One thing I'd like to add, listening to you, Wade, is that I do appreciate the comment Sunday that we need to come together and we need to work together. I think a great example of that is the Monroe Mountain Working Group, where you had a very diverse group of constituents that wanted different things on the mountain, and they brought all of that diversity together. And there were some tough meetings, but in the end, I think there's a great coalition of what come out of that. And I think that we can have that. There's no question that we can come together. One thing that I do want to clarify is that much of what is in here today is legislated. And so the wildlife board's purview in some of that is was given to the director. And so on that portion of that, we don't have the ability to act on that. I just want to make sure that that's understood. So, thanks. All right. One thing on the summary, I was going to try to summarize all the motions, and I think that the RAC chairs did a much better job than I could. So if there's any question on those, please ask the RAC chairs, but I won't try to summarize all those.
Chairman, I'll take a stab at some motions.
Okay.
And just before I do, we all bring life filters, and as people have said, I mean, we're not uniform in our lives, and obviously you aren't either. I've hunted cougars, I've killed a cougar, but I also feel that the dozen or so times that I've seen them when I've been out in the wild, it's a magical experience for me, just like the one presenter did. It was, she mentioned goosebumps, and that has occurred to me. So I want to try to strike a balance here. Middle road might not be the word I'd use, but balance is. And a lot of it is legislature. But what I think I'll do is I'll make a series of motions and we'll see where it goes on that. So the first motion I'd like to make is that we prohibit the taking of collared lions, with the exception of spot and stalk and depredation, livestock depredation, statewide.
Okay. One thing before I call on a second on that, I was going to do this, and Carl, if it's all right with you, I was going to ask Justin what that we don't allow that for other species, and be all right if I asked Justin to kind of state why that is, and if this would be throw a wrench in that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Justin Shannon. I'm the Chief of Wildlife. Just from a philosophical perspective, when it comes to research and radio collaring animals, we've always viewed that as secondary to the management of the hunting and those types of things that we've had. Certainly, if the board wanted to make this motion, we could implement it and carry it out. But the reason you didn't see it from the division is because as we do research, we didn't want that to come at the expense of our typical management and our hunting processes that we had. When we do things like this, it adds a level of complication to our guidebooks and enforcement and those types of things. And so for us, we've kind of, we haven't brought these things forward, even though there are good arguments on both sides of it, like you've heard today. So, I mean, certainly vote your conscience as wildlife board members, but the reason you didn't see it from us is we're aiming for simplicity, less regulation, and we just viewed research as secondary to hunting and management. So is that helpful?
Yeah, one follow-up question to that is, do you feel if this motion is passed, does it set a precedent for the other species that carry collars?
It could. And I think that's what's difficult. Sometimes you're putting brown collars on brown animals. And as was mentioned earlier from our director and others, then there's an enforcement component to that. And in some cases, we have areas where we wouldn't mind harvest of collared animals. We don't want the harvest of collared animals interfering with other research and studies and take like that would be down the road. And so My take is if you'd like to do something, I would recommend we do it on a case-by-case basis instead of statewide, with a time frame associated with it, because then we can repeal it. Because what we don't want to do is have future studies that are biased because colored animals weren't included in the harvest, and sometimes it works in that favor, and sometimes it's not needed at all. So those are my feelings on it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And one follow-up question. Director, we've heard that both a case for the only protecting the collars on those 6 units, and also a case to protect the collars statewide. And I guess from a law enforcement standpoint, can you speak to a preference?
I don't think as far as enforcement goes, it would make any difference whether it was statewide or the 6 units.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, listening to all that, I think the cougars in a tree is a different situation than everything else. And so I'll let my motion stand, and it may fail for a second, but I'll let it stand.
Could I ask a clarification? Then I'd consider seconding it. I agree with Justin that perhaps time parameters. The proposal for the study area was a 3-year length on it, and I certainly understand trying to have some consistency. But I think there's some wisdom in what Justin said. If we go statewide, I would probably prefer to see it be a 1 year and then a revisit at the end of 1 year. But I guess, would you entertain putting a time limit on your motion?
Absolutely.
Randy had a question.
I guess my question actually dealt with the number of collars out there. I like the idea of allowing us to get the data from those collars. I think it's invaluable to us to get that data, and we're learning a lot of things I think that we didn't know in the past, and so I think it's a really important thing to allow that to happen out there. I guess, but my concern is I don't want to get to the point where we're putting collars on every cougar out there to save it. I think we could go overboard with this. So I think if we do this, I think we need to set a boundaries and a limit. I know earlier, I think Darren, I think you mentioned 30 is what you're trying to maybe put collars on 30 in these 6 areas. So I don't know what the right number is, but I think if we go this route, it needs to have a set of boundary on it.
One question for Darren. With that 30, was there a target of how many females to males?
Yeah, our goal would be 5 females and 25 females. That's what we're looking at. And
5 males and 25
right.
females.
And just for the information of the board, the objective of the study really of this particular study is to look at scavenging behavior and how often do cougars scavenge on carcasses that they don't kill. There's a little bit of mystery in that, and so in this case, having individuals persist is maybe not as critical as it would be for some other study that you were looking at a different question. But
could I ask Aaron a question while he's up? Is the intent to continue to collar additional lions outside of the study area?
So we have a couple of reasons why we'd collar lions at the moment. One is for a study base. USU's wrapping up their study. So they've collected all the data. They're going to start analyzing. So we have collars on cats from that study in the state that we're collecting data on, and certainly we could look at that data later and answer other questions. But the study part of that is not active. On these 6 units, we're just beginning the study, and then we have, as you mentioned before, Wade, opportunistic. Those are few and far between, and would usually be limited to a lion that we actually were able to capture that was in a town and hadn't really done any kind of damage, and we want to just keep track of it to see where it goes. So hopefully that helps answer the question.
Hey, Darren, on the cats that are collared in the other units, did the harvesting of collared cats seem to affect the research data in a way that would interfere with the study?
It affects your sample size, and so to the extent that you can redeploy those collars, it's really not an issue, other than just the effort, like I said, that goes into it. And if you've ever tracked and hunted or tried to tree a collar or a cat, that can be really easy. and it can be really, really hard, and it just sort of depends. It seems like when I go, it's really, really hard. It's probably has something to do with my physique, but again, we can certainly adjust for that. And I agree with Justin 100%. We'd always want to take into account, what are our management objectives first, and we certainly did that with the USU study, where we had some of the same. The issues are the same, but we had collared cats on units where mule deer were really struggling, and so we felt like, just asking people not to was enough on those units. And in this case, it's a little different. So I agree with the case by case basis. I think we'd always prefer to have maximum flexibility and decide if we need to do it in a certain instance, let's do it there, but maybe not have sort of a blanket policy across the state.
So Darren, a follow-up question. You had mentioned earlier that of the USU study, there was still 19 that were online. Right. This 30 with this new study. So would it be the 30 plus the 19 of the collars?
Yes. Okay. And those collars usually last about 3 years. And so some of these collared cats will no longer be providing data, but they'll still be wearing the collars. So, that adds a layer of complexity too. So.
But you don't feel like it interfered with the efficacy of the study?
Not for these, no.
Okay.
Just a blanket statement towards the motion. I think there's a lot of data and a lot of value in what we can learn from these collars. I think it could completely change how we're managing lions, potentially, if we can gain enough. It doesn't sound like we have plans to put a lot of collars on lions throughout the entire state. But I would like to see those that are on now. I've been a part of that. It is very difficult to get those collars on. And you do hate to lose all that work and that opportunity just because someone would like to take a lion instead of going and finding another. I get that. But I think there's a lot of value in this. I'd hate to see this go long term. I'd hate to see it get large scale. I agree with Randy. I think we limit this in time and scope so that we're not hampering the take and hampering hunters out there. But I think there's a lot of value in this. I do support the motion, the premise of the motion. I think we can get a lot of, get more data that helps us make better decisions as we go forward.
Okay. Carl, thank you for letting us have a bunch of discussion. Bryce would like to, but I would just say that after we have Bryce, have you restate the motion.
I guess my question would be, could we get that same data out of those 6 units versus doing it statewide right off the get-go, and maybe look at a smaller, objective area instead of expanding it statewide right off the bat, would be my question.
I think it's a great question. I'd like to ask that to Darren, because right now that if we do it for the 6 units, how many of those 19 collars that are part of the USU study would be within those 6 units?
Good question. One of the really interesting things we've learned from the USU study is something that we've known, it's been in the literature, but it's really cool to see on the ground, is that these animals use a huge range, some of them. As you may recall, one of the lions that was captured near Bear Lake went all the way to Grand Teton National Park and came back down through Twin Falls and is now set up a home range just north of the border in Idaho. And we've had similar movements from the manti. So the short answer is it's possible that we could have animals move. But we seem to have really good connectivity, which is a good thing for lion populations in Utah from north to south. And in some parts of the state, it's an interstate population that's moving in and out. So it potentially could be. I like the idea of a sunset. I think, where, the study could end and we don't have, we tried drop off collars and we found that cougars are just too hard. Hunting deer is hard on collars. It turns out they knock them off. So we could still potentially have cougars with collars that either aren't working or that we no longer are concerned about them being harvested. And so I do like the idea of a sunset on in a particular study.
Does that answer your question, Bryce?
Chairman, it always worries me when our attorney walks up front. Greg, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, Greg Hansen, Utah AG's office. A lot of good discussion and brainstorming thus far, and it's kind of raised some questions in my mind too about maybe remembering the distinction between wildlife board roles and the division's role. Statutorily, the division is identified as the fact finder that brings information to the board for their decision making. And any motion that the board's considering, if it includes a numerical limit on the number of collars that the agency can put out on the landscape to collect that information, might begin to tread more into an agency role than a board role. So to the extent you can remember that as you formulate your motion might be some good background. By all means, it's within your purview to prohibit the take of animals that are collared, but the data collection side of that process is probably better suited for a division decision-making process and not a board decision-making process.
So a question on that would, I guess the division be willing to offer up a number then, because you're more apt to get support for something if if the sky's not the limit.
Sorry, I started talking before I got here. It's like I don't know if that's an age thing or what. I really like the idea of keeping this focus to these particular units, and I understand, Carl, where you're coming from about protecting data statewide, but I think we have a set number. We kind of know what we're dealing with in terms of numbers, and then on a case-by-case basis. Certainly if we felt like we started a new study and we needed to protect those collars, we'd make a recommendation to that effect, and something similar to what the discussion we're having here would occur internally. So up until now, we have a lot of collars out there, and our default has been to just discourage take and leave it at that. So does that help? Something else Kobe just let me know on the deer management plans, we reduced overall population objective by 50,000 deer as a result of our concerns about, or our exercise going through those plans too, just to put a number to those comments.
And I'll just echo that. That was a painful process to do that.
Mr. Chairman, while Carl's thinking, can I just throw out an idea? The concept has been, how do we justify selecting lion collars and protecting them and no other species that have collars on them? And the thought I've had is, we have collars on a lot of different species. None of it is relatively new. The scope of most of it, deer collars, elk collars, even sheep collars is fairly extensive. This lion collar is a fairly new thing. It's fairly emerging. The data is new. I think that's what sets it apart. I think that's how we can justify, if we chose to do this, how we can justify just protecting lions with collars on them as opposed to all species with collars.
Look, I'm going to amend the motion to add a sunset clause of 3 years on it. The length of the recommended 6-year study, or the 7 unit study on the Wasatch, with a sunset of 3. One of the reasons it's tipped the scale for me is these critters wander a long ways, and so I'd like to protect them for the 3-year period. And collected statewide.
Okay. The question is this motion for only the 6 units?
No. Statewide, all collared units, or all collared cougars statewide for 3 years.
And one follow-up question, is that for the 30 lions that are recommended in the study plus the ones that are online?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm not going to set a number. I think economics sets that. They're expensive and they're hard to get on. So I think economics will set the number.
So Darren, question is, so is that's the intent would be the 30?
Right. My understanding of the motion is any lion wearing a collar can't be taken by dogs under this proposal. For 3 years.
And this new, and your intent with this study would be you would put online 30 lions.
Right. Yeah. For this particular one, but obviously statewide there will be additional lions with collars
but those are ones that are existing.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Exactly. And catch per unit effort's a good point, Carl. It's hard to put. It's not easy to put collars on deer and elk, but it's tough to get them on lines because we're relying on volunteers and it's much harder. So the numbers aren't going to proliferate likely like they would on some other studies.
Okay, so it's clear. I mentioned spot and stalk, but the way to word, probably a better way to word that is use of hounds. Don't take a collar.
Okay. And just so that the wildlife board knows what they're voting on. So that would be a total of, if there's 19, so there's 19 that are working, but there are many more that have collars that aren't working. Is that what's out there?
Correct. Yeah. USU's collared 44. 10 of those maybe 15 of those will come back in. So and then plus these additional ones we've got getting out.
I think we're talking about 50 or 60 cougars statewide
at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Any
Is that
questions?
Clear as mud to everyone?
Stacy, do we have that clear? Let's have. Yeah.
So you had two exceptions. You had spot and stalk, which you've now changed to with the use of hounds. Are you still excluding depredation?
If one of these cougars starts depredating, it should be taken.
Okay. So I have, the motion is to prohibit the taking of collared lions with the use of hounds, excluding any depredation take for a period of 3 years.
Yes. Thank you. That sounds a lot better than when I put it together.
Okay. Any questions on the motion? Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. I'll call for a vote. Bryce?
Can we comment real quick on it?
Sure.
I'd just like to comment on the houndsman, the division for all working together on this and coming up with this, this study that not only benefits, could benefit the Farm Bureau, the wool growers. It could benefit the other side of the table, the science that comes up with it. So, I think this is the come together that everybody's talking about, the study that will benefit everybody. And I kind of applaud everybody for coming together and being sensitive to the depredation issue, but I just appreciate that. So.
Okay.
My turn to comment.
Sure.
Having been subject to collared mountain lions depredating on sheep, I will firmly vote against this motion. I think it skews the science, and I think that though it is hard work, they're very capable of replacing these collars on another cat. This isn't something that I can vote for.
All right. Go ahead. Bryce?
Sorry, I vote in favor.
Okay.
Yes.
Nay.
I'm in favor also.
Yes.
I'm in favor.
One opposed, the rest in favor. Motion passes.
I guess what I would instead of adjusting those triggers, I agree with let's leave it a little bit vague and the managers work on the predator management and the director. So I'll make the recommendation that we approve the rest of the cougar recommendation as presented.
I'll second it.
Okay.
I get to comment some more.
Sure.
having been in one of the, our and our neighbors' lambing ground lies within the Box Elder Desert Unit, which is up for a decrease in mountain lions. And even though that makes no sense to me, we're getting inundated with mountain lions coming out of Idaho. And in my opinion, it should be an increase. But I was ready to jump up first thing this morning and make a motion to change that. But after today and listening and my trust in the DWR and the biologists and all the things that have been said here, then I will not do that, and I'll vote in favor of this motion.
Is that in the interest of working together?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Saul, yep.
God, just a comment, if we could, a little discussion on this motion. I just wanted to speak. I mean, we just got done saving a few lions, which I think makes a few happy, but now we're going to talk about, I think the heartburn side of this with some people. And I just wanted to address a few issues. I agree with some of the comments that were made that the current deer population is not the fault of the lions. I agree. I think they're a component of it, but I agree that it's not their fault. That has been weather and Mother Nature. The drought and large winters that we've had have really what has compounded the problem and given us the current deer populations that we have. But I think the other side of that is, and Darren described it very well in the beginning, when we have depressed low deer populations, our prey base is lower and we've got the same amount of predators, that creates a problem. And so I do think we need to address predator population as well when our prey population is low. And I think that has been the intent over the last 12 months. It's been mentioned that our recommendations and permit numbers have gone up considerably in the last 12 months, and that is true. But I also think we need to consider that prey base has taken a significant hit in the last 20 months. And the other thing, I remember asking Darren the question a year ago about overall lion populations. What have they done in Utah in the last 30 years? And I'm probably misquoting him, but in my mind, it stuck out that they have almost tripled in the last 30 or 40 years. And that is significant. And so I think that's another thing we need to consider. Lion populations have not been staying the same. There are more of these wonderful creatures out there than there's ever been. And I agree with the comments that are made. I've seen these things in the wild. They're amazing animals, something that need to be protected, also need to be managed just like every other species that we've got. So I feel like this motion and this recommendation, this proposal does strike the balance, not just considering one or two species, but considering all of them. I think this does strike a balance.
So a question, Carl. One, we haven't called for a second, but there were a few motions that were made that come out of the. Huh? Oh, we did. Okay, thank you. But there were a few motions that come out of the rack that I'm going to ask the vice chairman to read those to see if we want to address any of those before we vote on the motion.
I've got a list, but they're not necessarily, well, some are, some aren't, but there's some things that were proposed, I guess, from the public side and the RAC side that we just need to remember. Do we want to talk about it or not in any of these things? One of them is the removal of the verbiage public lands from the rule, if we want to talk about that or not. Another one is to not add the beaver east to the predator management plan as predator management. Another one, I think Carl already talked about it, establish clear criteria for when a unit enters or exits a predator management designation. And the last one I wrote down is to move certain units from harvest objective split season, as I think was brought up by the UHA. Is there any of those we want to talk about before we, because if we make this, if we approve this motion on the table, it does away with all of those.
Any discussion on any of those?
I'm not ready to talk about any of those. The only one that would be removing the public land. I guess I don't quite understand that one. as much. The other situations I'm comfortable with.
That was taking public land off the depredation rule, and that has to be done by someone bigger than us.
Okay. Bryce?
Could Darren clarify the split season thing a little more? Just one more time.
It's been on the whole time. We did make an effort to try to simplify things a little bit to make the guidebook easier to understand. And so we got rid of the split season terminology, although we still have some units that fall under that concept. So on 10 of the units that aren't under predator management, we offer a limited entry season prior to opening the unit for harvest objective, and the number of permits available will be equal to the harvest objective for the unit. And then there are 10 that are just straight harvest objective. The houndsmen are proposing that we make all units that aren't under predator management have a limited entry season prior to going to harvest objective. We'd be opposed to doing that. We like, sometimes we put limited entry seasons on or don't put them on based on what's going on the ground. And we want our biologists to have the flexibility to do one or the other, depending on what they're trying to accomplish management wise. But does that help clarify what the proposal was? Okay.
All right. We'll go ahead and call for a vote. Bryce?
Yes.
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 Randy?
Yes.
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 Motion passes unanimous. All right, we will go to agenda item number 7, expo permit. Welcome, Kenny. Do you feel like there's anything that you would like to add that's gone through the rack?
So this one we are just going to present live.
Okay. Perfect.
So yeah, it went out through the rack packet. I think everybody's had a chance to look at that. That's where the detail is. And then this will be a little bit more of a high level.
Great.
If Paul can push the right buttons for me here. Thanks, man. Make sure there's... We good? We there?
We're there.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Board members, rack chairs, appreciate the opportunity to talk about completely shifting gears here to something besides the Cougar. So appreciate everybody's help. There's a lot of work that goes into this review of the performance of the expo every year. COVID, the pandemic caused a lot of interesting things to happen over the year, and one of them was making provisions to have a virtual expo. And so it was kind of interesting to work through it this year. And I appreciate the input from the various conservation groups and my internal staff for helping me put this together. A really quick background: the rule that established the expo was adopted in 2005. It provides 200 limited entry permits for a variety, up to 200 permits for a variety of species to be used and issued at a wildlife expo to be held in Utah, and to attract at least 10,000 people here for kind of that broader impact to and benefit to the state. And obviously to help fund wildlife conservation activities within our state as well. The first expo was held in 2007. The board approves the permits annually. The permits are issued through a random process with an application fee of $5 per permit or per hunt. And then we complete an annual compliance audit of performance every year. The current contract runs from 22 to 26. This is the review of the final 21 expo from the very end of the last contract. And 3 partners essentially work together on this effort: Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife, the Mule Deer Foundation, and the Utah Wild Sheep Foundation. And they distribute the permits at the Western Hunting and Conservation Expo. Per Rule 657-55, the scope of the audit includes these few bullet points. We essentially try to ensure that the data is properly handled and secure, that the programming for applications and the drawing of the permits was unbiased and random, that any selected applicants were verified for their eligibility to possess that permit before we issued them a permit, and then that the retained revenue was accounted for appropriately and project revenue was expended or transferred to the division in the appropriate timeframes. So let's just jump into the code review and security. So we had technical representatives from the now Utah Department of Government Operations do a thorough code review of the code used in the draw before the draw. And there were no issues identified there. The contractor completed third-party system scans and payment card industry, or PCI as it's more commonly known, self-assessment questionnaires before taking any applications. And appropriate measures were taken to ensure that the system and the data were secure. And you know, I tell you guys this every year, it's data everywhere, every website, every government. I mean, it's constantly under attack and under threat. And so we take this piece of it really serious and try to make sure that we do everything we can to secure that data and that information. And we didn't find any compliance issues there. Let's jump into the application date a little bit. This table was kind of getting a little unwieldy. The full back to 2007 is in the handout that you all have. I chopped the first 5 or so years off of this just so we could see it, read it a little bit better. But maybe of most interest on this slide is that last couple of years, 20 versus 21. We did see an increase in applicants, and we did see a nice increase in applications, which bumped the gross revenue up a little bit. And, you know, it's kind of to be expected. I don't think that was a surprise to anybody with not having to be there in person to validate your application last year. So kind of an interesting thing and not a surprise, I don't think, to anyone. And then here's that table kind of just in a graphic form, so you can just kind of see applications on the left axis and applicants on the right there. They just kind of follow each other, and then you see that little bit of a bump in the last couple of years there on the end. I'll let you look at that one for just a minute. Nothing super surprising there, I don't believe. Okay, let's jump into the revenue requirements. As a reminder, a few years ago through the public input process, we no longer track committed funds to projects. We only look at the bottom line, funds that were spent or transferred to the division. And another testament to the success of this process, for sure, brings a lot more transparency to it, and gives us a kind of a bottom line of how these funds are used each year. So here's a look at the retained revenue. So from the graph we just saw, the amount for division approved projects is that $1.50. And then for contractor approved conservation initiatives is $3.50, and that's those first 2 bullets are the breakdown there, 636,000 and 1.4 million in those 2 respectively. And our staff verified that those funds were they verified those fund balances were held separate and insured federal bank account or federally insured bank accounts. And then so for the $1.50, the groups have 2 years to expend or transfer those funds entirely to the division or spend them on approved projects, and there were no issues with project revenue. Okay, so here's a little bit closer look at the $1.50 specifically. So if we look at this table kind of top to bottom, left to right, we start with the carryover revenue from last year, add the new project revenue from 21, and then that gives us the total revenue available in the middle. And then we subtract any project expenditures, and in this case, some projects that were billed in July. So just outside of the snapshot of when we did the audit, and then that gives us our remaining funds balance at the very end there. I'll let you take a look at that one for just a second. Okay, and then we'll just jump ahead to the revenue for contractor approved initiatives. So these funds were also verified as deposited at that $3.50 split between the two groups. A total of $294,000 were spent on eligible expenses related to the expo. So expenses related to doing the drawing and marketing and those kinds of things are what that 294 is. And then we verify those expenditures with receipts and backup documentation from the various groups. And then the remainder was split 50-50. And I think you've all looked at the project list at the end of the attachment 2 to see what kinds of initiatives are being funded with those dollars. And again, just the revenue table to support that last slide. So we see the new project revenue, the new totals, and then the funds that were verified in the bank account by our staff. And then just some other really quick things. So it was a virtual expo entirely this last year. All the applicants have to have a hunting license to apply, but there was no there were no licenses sold on site this year for obvious reasons. And I think just the bottom line, we looked at everything we could look at. They took all the appropriate measures to secure the data, to do the scans, to make sure that information was protected. That the program code was random, that all the project revenue requirements were met, and that those deposits were kept separate in insured accounts. And you can see the benefits in the project list on the end of that. And there were no other findings or recommendations from this review.
I've got one, Kenny. I know last year when the board approved the opportunity to allow folks not to be on site to do this, that was just kind of a 1-year thing. Is there any thought or expectation that might be the same going forward, or would the person have to be on site in order to obtain that application going forward?
That's a great question, Randy. I'd hate to speculate to what might happen between now and next February. We did just put that in rule for 1 year for last year. So it's something we definitely ought to be kind of keeping an eye on and watching for the foreseeable future for this next expo for sure.
I could see the revenue was pretty good for the each side of that, but I think the revenue for the folks inside the expo is probably what it would have been losing a little bit there. So I'd hate to lose some of those expo booths that are in there, too. So
yeah,
I think that brings a lot of generation to the local economy.
Absolutely, benefits for them and for obviously the Utah economy for sure. So yeah, we prefer to have them in person, and yeah, we'll just have to kind of watch the next few months and see what happens.
Just appreciate all the work. Over the last few years, it's gotten very much easier to read, and the money's coming in and the money's going out. Obviously, last year I think was a little bit slower. We all understand that. Our partners, I believe, will get that out and rolling again. So I I, for one, think it's a real unique thing to have in wildlife, and we are doing a lot of great things with it, and we're getting a lot smarter with it. So,
Yep, I agree. Thanks, Carl.
Questions from the RAC chairs?
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Just curious on this. As you know, there's a lot of public thought on this, and historically in the southern region, we've had some feedback, pretty consistent every year about this and the process. I'm just curious why this wasn't an agenda item at the RACs and wasn't presented at the RACs.
That's a good question. We've just always had it be an information, well, it's an action item here at the board, but the information's the same. And so we try to share that, Braden, through the RAC packet so that it's reviewable and placed online so that everybody can see it.
I don't recall, was there a presentation online as part of the presentations with the last round? I don't think there was.
This time around, no, we presented it live in person. Last year we had we filmed it.
There was no presentation at the RACs.
No, this one traditionally just hasn't gone through the RACs. It's a requirement to report to the board in the rule, and that's just where we've typically done it. But we try to put the information out so that it's accessible to everybody.
Okay. And so I guess this is a question to the RACs, but if I could make a quick comment, I would love to see this at the RACs. I think it's great information for everyone to be able to see a little more clear, at least as in a presentation format online, now that we're doing those presentations online.
Yeah. And it could be, presented as an informational item there. So good comment.
Yeah, and I'd have to think there could be some timing issues with Stacy's.
Ready for the RAC, then we prefer the board to see it to approve it. I mean, we can send it out after, but there's some timing issues to get it on the RACs prior to it.
Okay. Well, maybe there's some discussions we can have to try to, as soon as that's available, try to get it out to the RACs.
I definitely think we could do that, Stacy. Once we finalized it, we have it ready. We could share that, Braden, with everybody, at least in the detailed format, so you guys have it.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, just even posting this presentation, it would be great.
Okay.
Good comments. All right, we will ask the director for a summary.
We didn't have any public comments on this.
All right, and likewise, we didn't have any motions from the RACs. Do we have any comments from the audience? Okay. No clarification?
Nope, I think we're good.
Okay. All right, and board discussion.
Mr. Chairman, just a question then. So are we basically just approving the audit, or are we approving the next year's activity?
Typically, it's just been the audit to my recollection.
Mr. Chairman, all the division is asking for is the board to accept the audit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this is the audit, but I believe Justin is the tags for next year.
Yeah, he'll give that.
Yeah.
If that's the case, Mr. Chair, I'd move that we accept and approve the audit as presented.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion or questions on the motion? Okay, I'd call for a vote. Bryce?
Yes.
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 Motion is unanimous.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, Justin. This for those following online, this is number 8 expo permit allocation.
When did we start using Max?
Is that a question, Chief?
It's to the chair. Yeah.
It's a box elder high computer thing.
Lots of people graduate without honors, Bryce. My name is Justin Shannon. Today I'm going to present the 2022 Expo permit allocation. This is a presentation that we bring forth every year at this time, and it sets forth the 200 permits that will be advertised in the coming months and available at the 2022 Hunt Expo. And so to begin, have a few proposed changes. We're recommending to do away with the Fillmore Oak Creek archery and muzzleloader permits, the San Juan Elk Ridge permit, and then 4 various permits on the Book Cliffs, 2 for the north, 1 for the south, and then 1 archery permit for the entire unit. And with that, we're recommending to replace those with the Cache Crawford Mountain muzzleloader permit, and then 2 for the South Slope Diamond Mountain, 1 for archery, 1 for muzzleloader, a Wasatch Mountains East late season muzzleloader permit, a Fillmore Oak Creek, any legal weapon permit, and then 2 any weapon permits for the South Slope Diamond Mountain unit. For elk, the changes are a little bit more simple. We're recommending doing away with the Book Cliffs Little Creek roadless permit. That hunt was discontinued, and recommending 1 permit for the Beaver East any legal weapon early hunt. For pronghorn, have a few changes here, recommending discontinuing 6 permits for the South Slope Vernal, West Desert Snake Valley, and Fillmore Oak Creek South units, and replacing those with an archery and muzzleloader permit for the Fillmore Oak Creek unit, an archery and muzzleloader permit for the San Rafael North unit, and an archery and muzzleloader permit for the Southwest Desert unit. Our last change involves bison, recommending discontinuing a permit for the Book Cliffs Bitter Creek South unit for a hunter's choice and the Book Cliffs cow only permit, and replacing those with a Book Cliffs Bitter Creek permit for hunter's choice and a Book Cliffs Bitter Creek permit for cow only. And this Book Cliffs Bitter Creek is a new hunt that's currently in the rack packet right now, and it's going to be proposed at the next wildlife board meeting. And we're going to recommend in that rack packet to discontinue these other 2 hunts. And so I recognize this as somewhat of a presumptuous recommendation to bring forth recommendations on hunt units that haven't been approved by this board in the future. And so if these future hunts are rejected, we would just ask the ability to select 2 expo permits for approved bison hunts in the Book Cliffs, if that makes sense. So, all of their permits are the same as last year, totaling 200 permits. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Questions from the board? Questions from the rack chairs?
I
One for
have
Justin.
one question. The question was centered on the deer permits. What triggered the changes on them, and why did you decide to change the different units on those deer permits for the expo?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Maybe I should have started with that. Sometimes as we go, let me pull up that table once again. Sometimes as we go through this over time, we have increases or decreases in public draw permits and various things like that. And then sometimes it's just a matter of, can we provide different types of opportunity? You know, we've for instance, the Wasatch Mountains East late muzzleloader hunt. That's one that people have really liked those, and we don't have a lot of those in the expo. And we thought, let's throw another one in. And then other times it's just, you know, in looking at the number of permits that we have available and how many go to the expo, sometimes some of these aren't represented very well. And so we just kind of look for a balance, and it is kind of the idea behind it. So.
Can I ask you on the antelope tags that you eliminated in the Uinta Basin and moved? What their driving force was there? South Slope Vernal tags?
You know, I might need some help with that. Kobe, do you remember the why behind that recommendation? It's a good question.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Honestly, it was just looking around at where we're allocating permits, permit numbers increasing or decreasing, and saying, okay, although the expo is another type of public draw permit, we just moved them to areas where we're either increasing in pronghorn permits or population's increasing. And so we felt like we could put them in different places that it made more sense, right? They're not stagnant permits. We just try to follow what's going on with public draw permits across the state.
All right, thank you. Board discussion?
I like it.
Make a motion, we accept the recommendation as presented.
Okay, thanks, Bryce. A second?
I'll second it.
Okay, seconded by Randy. Any discussion on the motion? All right, I'll call for a vote. Bryce?
Yes.
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 Motion passes unanimous. We'd like to take a 5-minute break. Okay, be back in 5 minutes.
somebody needed to sell, they did a little, scoop up the file, but
Just was waiting to see if he states something. All right, got the thumbs up. So welcome back. Thanks for that 5-minute break. Some of us are getting a little older. So now we will jump to agenda item number 9, drought permit recommendations.
Perfect. All right. Before I start this, Lindy was just telling me that she thinks my whole purpose at work is to make her life rough. So, Lindy, you're welcome. And just want to discuss with the board some additional drought permit recommendations for elk. So this first slide here, when you look at the last time we brought additional drought permits, it was in 2018, right? So in 2018, we realized we were in a drought. Things were hard. And I remember that some of the records being the worst drought recorded in modern history. And then this is a comparison of that to August of this year, with, you know, the darker the color, the darker the red being the more extreme. So we are definitely in a drought. And I pulled this off. This data is after a lot of the monsoonal moisture that we've received. We're in a drought. So drought is it's in place across basically all the state. It always affects wildlife and their habitats and their populations. This is a commitment that we made in the statewide elk plan. When we rewrote the statewide elk plan, we said, and it doesn't make sense for us to bring back or to have additional permits in April, but we will commit to the public and to the wildlife board. If it looks like populations or habitats are at risk, we will bring back a recommendation of additional permits. And so this presentation is completing with that commitment. When we asked the district biologists to look and consider, here are some of the factors that they considered and whether or not they're going to make a recommendation for additional drought permits. Not all units are the same. Not all situations are the same. And I should acknowledge that with this monsoonal moisture, we've seen habitats above about 7,000 feet, 7,500 feet. They actually look pretty good. And a lot of this concern is our winter ranges. So there were a lot of things that they considered, but here's a short list of some of the things that each biologist considered as they decided whether or not to recommend additional permits in the unit that they oversee. So they looked at range condition, winter range, herd health for both elk and deer. So what are our survival rates look like? What do our cow-calf ratios or fawn-doe ratios look like? What was last year's body fat? All these things as far as herd health metrics. They considered the potential for elk to negatively impact deer. So where are the winter ranges and what do those usually look like? And if we have a moderate, severe winter, is there going to be overlap? And if deer are struggling a bit, is there potential in that area for elk to impact deer? They considered the impacts to producers and the fact that they are struggling as well during this time. They considered the population status and where they were at in regards to their herd objective. And they considered the potential for additional harvest. You know, with elk, there's definitely the law of diminishing returns. And adding more permits does not always equal more harvest. And so you have to have that intimate knowledge of the unit to know if it's a good idea or not to add more permits. With that, we'll go through the list of additional permits. I don't think we need a lot of discussion on this. I'll just explain the chart and then allow some time for everybody to look at where we're adding permits and what we're adding. So if you look at the chart, we've got the unit, the population objective, followed by the estimate. The 2021 approved permits that were approved this spring, followed by the increase or recommended additional drought permits. Starting in the Northeastern region, Give everybody a chance to look at those. Recommending 540 additional permits. Onto the central region with 70 total additional permits. In the southern region, I'm recommending 237 additional permits. I'm sorry, southeastern region, excuse me. And then in the southern region, recommending 255 additional permits. Now you'll notice this is the stark contrast, right? The northern region. And it was quite a discussion with the region and the biologists. And with the makeup of the land in northern Utah, really, they felt like they were at capacity with the number of permits they had out on the landscape, meaning that a lot of these units are comprised of a lot of private land, and that the additional harvest would have to come from working with our CWU partners and getting that additional harvest there. So they didn't feel like adding permits would result in more harvest, just in possibly lower success or more frustration among sportsmen. When we did this, when there is drought, there's always increased conflict with private lands and private landowners. And so we asked the regions and the biologists to also look at if they felt like it was necessary to increase our private lands only permits that are sold over the counter that allow a private landowner to alleviate damage when they have it. And here's a list in alphabetical order of those additional. Also, you'll notice here that there's one new unit on this slide, the Fillmore, asking for 50 private lands permits on that unit. And the Plateau Fish Lake Thousand Lakes asking for 120 private lands only permits on that unit. Asking for an increase of 1,638 private lands permits. In summary, due to persistent drought, we're asking the Wildlife Board to increase antlerless elk permits to increase harvest where we may have conflict, issues with habitat, or impacts to other populations. So a total of 1,102 antlerless elk permits, including adding back in one hunt on the LaSalle-Dolores Triangle, and asking for 1,638 private lands permits, including two new private lands units on the Fillmore and Plateau Fish Lake. For the private lands permits, the additional permits would go on sale September 8th. And for the other, and for the new draw permits, we would use the current draw list in order as to what they were drawn to reach out to hunters that put in for antlerless elk for those units and were unsuccessful, and ask them if they'd like this opportunity. And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the board?
Kobe, can you go back to that last private land tag slide? I saw a 500 number up there, but I didn't see what unit that was. Yeah, that one right there. Okay, Wasatch Creek. Isn't that in the Northeast region?
Yes, most of it. I think they always try to steal it. It's right there on the edge of the Northeast and Central region. And some of these, honestly, may go undersubscribed or undersold. And we understand that. And it offers a private landowner a tool when there is conflict that he doesn't have to have those elk on him if he's at a point where the tolerance levels are just gone.
Other questions? Okay, questions from the rack chairs. Kent?
Yeah, just would you clarify how you distribute those tags for the public land hunts?
I could, but I'd be taking an opportunity away from Lindy, which I think it would be great if she came up here and was able to speak to that.
Thanks, Kobe. So on the public land permits, what we would do is use the alternate list. So applicants that applied for a certain hunt, we would take that list and we're going to email those hunters and extend this offer to them. So then they'll get the email saying, hey, you have, the Wildlife Board approved additional drought permits. This opportunity is available for you now. And if you'd like to purchase this permit, they can go into any regional office, agent, or buy it online. It'll be available to them as soon as the email goes out. So we'll just be offering it to people that applied. If they do accept this opportunity, they will lose their preference points for antlerless elk, and that will be expressed in the email as well. So it's like they drew out in the drawing.
Do they need to bring that email with them?
Nope, it is, as long as they have their customer ID number and their date of birth, that will be there for them.
So that just goes out to all the unsuccessful applicants and it's first come, first serve?
No, we use the alternate list. So every person receives a draw number when they apply for a certain hunt. And we'll just take the next person on the list that would have drawn if these permits were in the drawing. So some of these units only have, 10 or 50 permits. So we'll just email the next 10 people and let them know this opportunity is available for them.
Good question, Camp. Any others?
And Cody, on the private lands only tags, do you suspect you're going to get that kind of a harvest from those folks?
I'm trying to think back through harvest rates on those. I don't have that presentation in front of me right now. Feels like we've been like 24 to like 30%. It just depends, Randy. And that is that if you pressure elk enough, they just won't stay there. So I don't know that it's a concern that will over harvest due to those, but it allows a tool to apply pressure to a herd that may be causing conflict. And they'll find a place where there is less conflict, and there will be some harvest in addition to that. So I don't know, does that answer your question? Okay.
And one thing I would state, Colby brought it up, but again, these permit numbers are due to drought, and this was very live. It was ongoing, probably up to the last day or two, and so this did not go out to the racks. So there wasn't any motions, but we will open it up to public comment. So we first will have Wade Garrett, followed by Troy.
Wade Garrett, Utah Farm Bureau. I would like to rise in support of this. Ag has taken a lot of cuts this year, as many may know. Appreciate our partners in wildlife understanding and being willing to take cuts as well. It's not easy on any of us as we grow herds, either as ranchers or we grow wildlife herds. It's hard, and we get that it's hard, but it is appreciated. It does help that we're all in it together, and hopefully these recent rains and continued rains, and we don't have to have this discussion next year for any of us. That would be our hope, but we just appreciate these recommendations and strongly support them, and thank Covey and his team for working on them.
Thank you. Troy?
Troy Forrest, Utah Department of Agriculture and Food. And I just basically want to echo what Wade said, but say thanks. Having served on the elk committee when we went through that process, we said we would do this. Kudos to the division for following up and doing it. It's tough. We've got guys that last year went out on their winter permits with less than half their numbers and fed hay, and hay was pretty available last year. This year, feeder hay is going for $280 a ton. So it's a tough year. And many of our producers, some of the deserts haven't gotten the storms that we've got. We flooded in some places, but some places haven't got any. I can tell you one afternoon it rained 2.5 inches in Bothwell, that's 3 miles from my house, and I didn't get 3 drops. And that's common throughout the state of Utah. That's been the pattern of these monsoon storms. So we appreciate you guys recognizing that, stepping up and taking a look at your numbers and cutting them, because in ag, we have cut numbers significantly. Talking to producers, they're looking at culling everything that looks at them cross-eyed this fall and then selling 4 or 5 beyond that. It's just a tough year. And we appreciate you guys acknowledging that and supporting us. So thanks.
Thanks, Troy. Colby, do you have anything to add?
I don't think so. Just, yeah, this is one of the areas where we can cooperate and work together. You know, Troy's right. Like wildlife and ag, we use the same resource. We, when things are good, we both thrive. When things are bad, we both struggle. And that relationship over the past couple of years has gotten a lot stronger, working together. And this is one area where we can work together. So I guess I just like to highlight that. Like, we're on the same team pushing forward. We want better conditions. We want to grow populations, and so do they. So with that in mind, that's the recommendation.
Thank you.
Covey, before you sit down, I guess I got a quick question. Like on that Wasatch East where there's 500 no additional private lands tax, how does the hunter, maybe there was 500 more people that put in or that know about that area, but how does a hunter that wants to buy one of those know a landowner that needs the help? I mean, how's that coordinated?
That's actually probably an area where we could improve as an agency. So a lot of times our localized, that we do it at a regional level. And when DAX or somebody has a depredation issue, they say, hey, this tool's available. Would you like us to work to let people know? But it's probably an area where we could improve and get the word out to more public hunters. A lot of this is facilitated through individual hunters that know individual landowners, and they work that out without us in the middle, right? But as far as working to provide a way to sportsmen to say, these landowners would appreciate some help, we probably haven't bridged that gap yet. And I don't have all the answers, but it's worth talking about.
It just seems like 500 additional tags is, for people that might not have been hunting that area or working at just a lot to try to figure out. And hopefully there's a list or something that maybe at the offices that the hunters might be able to pull from, to call and say, can I get on your property type thing. So,
and a lot of times as folks talk to our depredation technicians in the field or somebody in the field and say, hey, I'm looking for a place to hunt elk. If people communicate with us, without prejudice, we'll say, well, we know of this individual, we know, so we try to help facilitate those relationships. It's just not formalized.
Thank you.
All right, so there wasn't any rack motions, so I will go ahead and open it up for board discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to echo what has already been said just a little bit. With Utah, so much of Utah being public lands, this has always been a challenge. This issue has always been a sticking point. When federal land agencies start cutting AUMs and start reducing one use on public lands, and yet a lot of the other uses continued, I think a lot of the producers and the public land grazers had a legitimate concern, had a legitimate complaint. And the division really has stepped up and partnered and collaborated, compromised, and then they're true to their word, stepping up and doing this. This is a wonderful program. I agree with Troy. The conditions like we're in right now hurt everyone. Private landowners, public land grazers, wildlife, the herds, everything. We're all struggling, and we all need to sacrifice. Multiple use means multiple use. That means that when the habitat is not there, when the resource is not there, we all take cuts, and that is what is happening here. And so I'm in big support of this and this concept, and I just appreciate Kobe and everyone that's been a part of this, because this is important and quite frankly a little, I won't go as far as saying historic, but this is a step in the right direction.
I just appreciate the strategic way they've done this. It would have been really easy just to say, okay, increase everything 10% or something that way. But they've looked through this. These areas need more, they've put more. These areas need less, they've put less. I just really appreciate that.
Make a motion, we approve the recommendations as presented.
I'll second it.
Okay, got a motion by Bryce, seconded. That motion's clear, Stacy? Okay, any discussion on the motion? All right, I'll call for a vote. Bryce?
Yes.
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 Okay, unanimous, motion passes. All right, we'll move on to other business. There's one item that I want to address, and that is at the start of the meeting in the action log, there's a little bit of confusion, but the Wildlife Board had asked the division to do a survey on both technology and on trail cameras. And a couple meetings ago, we had asked that we had a separate survey on trail cameras. The Wildlife Board was under the impression that survey was ongoing, that was going to come out. And the division was under the impression that the survey they did on technology with some questions on trail cameras was sufficient. And so with that, with some discussion with the division, the Wildlife Board would like to recommend that we pull the agenda item, this portion of the agenda item from the September RAC that would allow time for that survey to be done. And I want to be clear to the public and those that are listening so that this agenda item is bigger than a 7-member board and what our vote is. And this agenda item is bigger than what a RAC chair or RAC vote is. This is big for the public, and we want to make sure that we get it right. And so with this requesting this is a big ask of the division, and we understand that. But it is that we get what the public wants and that we drill down to that. And so with that, I would ask the Wildlife Board to discuss that.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion and then we can discuss if that's okay. I'd move that we do just that, remove the technology agenda item from the next cycle until we've had the chance to work through a survey and some additional discussion.
I have a question. Are you talking about just the trail cam portion or the entire technology part?
I would refer that to the director.
Kobe, can you address that, please?
Thanks, Director. No, I think for us that when we do a big game rule change, it doesn't make sense to bring the big game rule forward more times than we need to. And so if you're asking us to hold off on a portion of the rule change to acquire some additional information, I would prefer to hold off on the rule change.
Great. I think that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would second his motion.
Okay. And so that motion, to clarify, would cover that whole agenda item.
The whole agenda item as it's presented right now.
All right. Any questions on the motion? All right. I'll call for a vote. Bryce?
Yes.
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 Unanimous, motion passes. All right. Is there any other business? All right. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
I'll second it.
All in favor? Bryce?
Yes.
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 Unanimous, motion passes. Thank you. Meeting adjourned. Thank you. Thank you. Smooth.